Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why you wouldn't last a day on a medieval pilgrimage. Not the quaint, fairy tale journey you imagine, but a grueling trek where the truth is, a blistered foot might just be the least of your worries. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. The medieval pilgrimage, a romanticized journey of self-discovery, enlightenment, and maybe a few blisters. But let's cut the tapestry. This was no leisurely stroll down the Canterbury Trail. The decision to embark on a pilgrimage in the Middle Ages was less about finding yourself and more about losing your life savings, possibly your sanity, and definitely your sense of smell. Think of it as the medieval version of selling everything to backpack across Europe, but instead of in star-worthy charts and hostels, you got relentless mud and the occasional threat of bandits. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. First off, why on earth, or rather, why in medieval Europe, would anyone willingly leave the relative comfort of their thatched-roof hovel to wander across the continent? Well, it boiled down to a cocktail of faith, fear, and a dash of social pressure. Religion was the social media of the time. If you weren't participating, were you even living? People believed the road to salvation was paved with good intentions and a fair amount of dirt. A pilgrimage could shave off years in purgatory, kind of like a holy fast pass to heaven. But hold your horses, or your oxen, or whatever beast of burden you might have had to sell. Yes, you heard me right. The average medieval peasant often had to sell their cow or a good chunk of their worldly goods just to afford the trip. Costs could vary wildly, but a journey to Santiago de Compostela could set you back roughly 20 shillings. To put it in perspective, that's like blowing several months' wages on a single trip today. Talk about putting all your eggs in one basket, or, in this case, one very rickety cart. The motivations weren't purely spiritual, though. Oh no, there was a big helping of social pressure ladled on top. Imagine the medieval equivalent of keeping up with the Joneses, except the Joneses were off gallivanting to Jerusalem, and your family was looking at you like, so, when are you going to do something holy with your life? Not to mention, failing to go could be seen as a lack of piety, which might not be the best look when hellfire and damnation were considered very real threats. Let's not forget the allure of adventure, because who doesn't love the idea of hitting the open road? However, this road was more likely to hit back, talking about routes littered with the dangers of bandits, wild animals, and the occasional marauding army. The pilgrimage paths were less highway and more the medieval version of an obstacle course, where instead of a prize you got the hope of spiritual brownie points. And then there's the food, or lack thereof. Picture this. You're trudging along, dreaming of roast pheasant, but instead you're gnawing on hardtack, a delightfully chewy bread-like substance with the consistency of a brick. That is, if you're lucky enough not to have it infested with weevils. Even the most devout must have had moments of doubt while picking bugs out of their meals. But hey, what's a little hunger when you're in search of divine enlightenment, right? Except enlightenment didn't come with a guarantee. For every pilgrim who claimed to have seen a vision or felt touched by the divine, there were countless others who only got sore feet and a cold. And let's talk about those feet. Walking hundreds of miles in medieval footwear is an experience that would make modern podiatrists wince. Leather shoes, if you could afford them, were more like leather socks. Expect blisters, and if you're lucky, maybe just a few lost toenails. Still, the allure of the pilgrimage persisted. After all, there was the promise of relics, those sacred objects that were said to hold miraculous powers. They were the medieval must-see attractions. The bones of a saint could be just as compelling as a modern-day celebrity sighting. Getting to touch a relic was like scoring backstage passes to eternity. So there you were, a brave soul, ready to embark on this epic journey. But before you set foot on that dusty path, you'd have to settle your affairs. This wasn't just a case of setting your out-of-office reply. You needed to make sure your land, animals, and family could survive without you, because there was a non-zero chance you'd never come back. It's a bit like leaving for a gap year and having to write a will just in case you don't return. The decision to go wasn't taken lightly. It was a calculated risk, an investment in your soul's future. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was a gamble with odds stacked against you. Between the financial burden, the physical hardships, and the ever-present threat of death, the medieval pilgrimage was a spiritual stock market crash waiting to happen. Yet, despite the harsh realities, the dream of a divine payoff kept many trudging forward, one painful step at a time. And there you have it, the not-so-glamorous truth behind the medieval pilgrimage. A journey fueled by faith, fraught with peril, and drenched in mud. It's a wonder anyone survived to tell the tale, but we'll pick up on how you might have fared, or failed, in the next leg of our journey. Stay tuned, because the road only gets rockier from here. Now that you've decided to take the plunge into the perilous world of medieval pilgrimage, let's talk about the essentials you'll be dragging along. Spoiler alert. This isn't your trusty North Face backpack filled with microfiber towels and power banks. Think more along the lines of a patched-up sack that's about as reliable as a cardboard umbrella in a hurricane. For the medieval pilgrim, travel gear was a mix of practicality and pure desperation. Forget sleek, ergonomic designs. You were more likely to see a hodgepodge of items strapped to your back or hanging off your belt, including a wooden staff that doubles as a walking aid and a jaunty weapon against the odd highwayman. Your attire on this holy road trip was less about making a fashion statement and more about survival, though survival here is a generous term. The medieval wardrobe was a battlefield where practicality and sartorial disasters fought it out. Most pilgrims donned a tunic, a cloak, and whatever passed for shoes back then, leather foot coverings that were about as waterproof as a sponge. If you were a bit of a high roller, you might even have a woolen hood, perfect for those charming English rains, or for hiding your face when the local innkeeper realized you couldn't pay your tab. Speaking of inns, let's dive into the medieval hospitality industry, a term I use with hearty sarcasm. The inns along the pilgrimage routes were a mixed bag, often leaning heavily towards the I'd rather sleep outside end of the spectrum. Imagine the medieval version of a one-star Yelp review, but without the option to vent online. These establishments were notorious for their dubious quality, often overcrowded and filled with fleas that were more persistent than your aunt's chain emails. You'd share a straw mattress with whatever critters decided to join the party, and if you were lucky, you might avoid the more unsavory types lurking in the shadows. Food on your journey was another adventure in lowered expectations. Set your taste buds to survive rather than savor, because your medieval menu was not exactly Michelin star material. Meals were a gamble, ranging from passable to potentially hazardous. Bread was a staple, of course, but calling it bread might be generous. More like a rock-hard loaf that could double as a weapon in a pinch. If you were lucky, you'd score some cheese that hadn't yet turned into a biology experiment. Meat was a luxury unless you were okay with the mystery variety, what some might call gamey, others would describe as questionable. And hygiene, forget about it. Medieval cleanliness practices, or the lack thereof, might make you reconsider ever leaving your dirt-floored home. Bathing was as rare as a solar eclipse, and even then it was more of a splash-and-dash affair rather than a cleansing ritual. People believed that too much bathing could weaken the body and open it up to disease, which in a time before hand sanitizer was a theory that probably didn't hold much water. Pilgrims often carried a small flask of holy water, not for washing, but to ensure divine protection. So, forget about freshening up with a quick shower. The best you could hope for was a rainstorm. In this gritty tableau of travel woes, it's tempting to romanticize the journey as a noble pursuit of faith, akin to a spiritual marathon complete with a heavenly finish line. But let's be real. The shine wears off quickly when you're slogging through mud, dodging thieves, and trying to remember the last time you had a meal that didn't involve some form of gruel. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a certain allure, an unspoken camaraderie among fellow travelers, a shared sense of purpose that got you through the worst days. That, along with the promise of those relics waiting at your destination, kept many pilgrims shuffling along, one blistered foot in front of the other. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more challenging, let's not forget the political and social intricacies that could trip you up along the way. Borders in medieval Europe were about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. You had to navigate a patchwork of petty kingdoms and principalities, each with its own set of rules, taxes, and tolls. Think of it as the ultimate bureaucratic obstacle course, where every wrong move could land you in a local jail for the night. But fear not, because your trusty pilgrim badge, an actual badge worn on your cloak, was your golden ticket, offering some protection and identifying you as an official seeker of spiritual enlightenment. The pilgrimage was anything but a straightforward journey. It was a test of endurance, faith, and your ability to negotiate with innkeepers and the occasional bandit. Yet, the dream of reaching that sacred destination, of seeing the relics and feeling a touch closer to the divine, was a powerful motivator. It was the medieval version of FOMO, the fear of missing out on heavenly rewards. So, despite the mud, the blisters, and the ever-present threat of a medieval mishap, you pressed on. As you trudged along, each mile brought new challenges and new stories to share, or to exaggerate, once you returned home. Assuming, of course, you made it back. But that's a story for another day. For now, you're just trying to survive the next leg of this medieval endurance test. Stay tuned for more tales of woe and wonder as your pilgrimage continues. As you soldier on through the medieval mud, let's get into the nitty-gritty of what these pilgrimage routes really looked like. Imagine trudging along the Camino de Santiago, the superstar of pilgrimage paths, stretching over 500 miles from the French Pyrenees to the shrine of St. James in Santiago de Compostela. This wasn't your neighborhood 5K. It was a sprawling journey that could take months, depending on how often you stopped to rest, or argue with locals over the price of a stale loaf of bread. Now, the Camino wasn't just one route. It was a network. Think of it as the medieval precursor to a major interstate highway, with branches snaking through France, Spain, and beyond. Each path offered its own set of challenges, from treacherous mountain passes to endless plains where the sun could roast you like a medieval rotisserie chicken. And that's not even counting the delightful weather. Rain, sleet, and the occasional biblical storm were all part of the package. If you were lucky, you'd get a sunny day, perfect for working on that peasant tan. But here's the kicker. Despite the romantic allure of these routes today, they were no walk in the park back then. For one, the threat of bandits was as real as your blisters. These weren't your charming, Robin Hood-style rogues with a heart of gold. No, these were the kind of cutthroats who made a living off plundering hapless pilgrims. Having your coin purse lightened was the least of your worries. Losing your life was a far more pressing concern. Some pilgrims banded together for safety, but even in numbers, the risk was high. It was like playing a medieval version of Russian roulette, except you were armed with nothing more than faith and a walking stick. And let's not forget the locals. While some towns welcomed pilgrims with open arms, probably more for the economic boost than for any spiritual kinship, others viewed the steady stream of wanderers as a nuisance. Imagine living in a quaint village, only to have your peaceful existence interrupted by a parade of dusty, smelly strangers demanding food and lodging. Hospitality could be warm, but it could also be as chilly as a January morning in the Alps. Pilgrims had to be savvy negotiators, often haggling for the basics or offering prayers in exchange for a roof over their heads. Economically, this journey was no small feat. Covering the costs of food, lodging, and those pesky toll roads could drain your purse faster than a medieval tax collector. Speaking of tolls, crossing from one fiefdom to another often required a bit of silver for the local lord's coffers. It was a medieval pay-as-you-go system, reminding you that spiritual enlightenment had a very earthly price tag. The physical toll was another matter entirely. Walking hundreds of miles wasn't just exhausting. It was transformative in ways that a yoga retreat could only dream of. By the time you reached your destination, you were likely a few pounds lighter, assuming you didn't succumb to the charms of medieval ale along the way. And those blisters, let's just say they weren't the kind you could pop and forget. They were more like badges of honor, albeit painful ones, reminding you of every single step you took towards salvation. But why endure this grueling trek, you ask? The medieval mind was a tapestry of faith, fear, and fervor. The belief that this suffering could earn you divine favor, or at least a reduction in purgatory time, was a powerful motivator. It was the ultimate spiritual investment, with hopes for holy dividends in the afterlife. The journey was less about the destination and more about the transformation along the way. A medieval version of eat, pray, love, minus the eat part, given the questionable cuisine. Despite the dangers and discomforts, the pilgrimage routes were bustling arteries of medieval life. They were melting parts of culture and commerce, where languages mingled and ideas were exchanged. You might start your journey as a solitary seeker of salvation, but along the way, you'd encounter fellow travelers from all walks of life, merchants, monks, and maybe even a disgraced noble or two. This was where medieval society converged, a living, breathing tapestry of humanity on the move. And then there were the relics, the ultimate goal of this arduous journey. Relics were the medieval equivalent of blockbuster attractions, promising a connection to the divine that could heal the body and save the soul. The bones of a saint could draw pilgrims like medieval moths to a holy flame, each hoping for a miracle or at least a glimpse of something greater than themselves. It was the carrot at the end of a very long, very muddy stick. Of course, this wasn't just about personal piety. The pilgrimage had a social dimension that's easy to overlook. Returning home, you'd carry tales of far-off lands and sacred encounters, elevating your status in the eyes of your peers. It was the ultimate humble brag, a way to show that you'd not only survived a perilous journey, but had done so in the name of faith. So, as you plod along these ancient paths, battling fatigue and fending off bandits, remember that you're part of a storied tradition, one that's as much about the journey as it is about the destination. Sure, the road is tough, and the payoff isn't guaranteed, but isn't that what makes it all the more meaningful? And with that, we leave our intrepid pilgrims still slogging through the mire, their spirits buoyed by the promise of relics and redemption. But don't hang up your walking stick just yet. There's more to uncover on this medieval odyssey. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the perils and promises of the pilgrimage path. The road ahead is long, but as any pilgrim would tell you, the journey is just beginning. So, you've made it this far, trudging through the medieval mire, and finally, the end is in sight. Picture this. You've reached the outskirts of a bustling boom town, the gateway to your holy destination. But hold on to your pilgrim hat. This isn't the solemn, serene arrival you might have imagined. It's more like stepping into a medieval carnival, where spirituality meets capitalism with all the subtlety of a jousting match. These towns, springing up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, were the medieval version of a gold rush. Take Santiago de Compostela in the 11th century, for example. The local economy practically erupted, transforming from a sleepy village to a thriving hub, all thanks to the influx of pilgrims. Imagine thousands of travelers descending with coins jangling in their pockets, each looking to part with their hard-earned silver in exchange for a place to sleep, a heart meal, or a keepsake, maybe even a relic if they were feeling particularly flush. Let's talk about those relics for a moment. Sure, they were the spiritual superstars of the pilgrimage, but collecting them was a cutthroat business. Churches vied for the best bits of saints like modern museums compete for blockbuster exhibits. A toenail from St. Peter, that's a showstopper. The skull of a less renowned martyr, better luck next century. It was a medieval relic arms race, where the holiest artifacts pulled the most visitors and, consequently, the most coin. Canterbury's cathedral, for instance, became a magnet after acquiring relics of Thomas Becket, drawing pilgrims like moths to a particularly sacred flame. But let's not get too carried away with the divine allure. Behind the scenes, there was plenty of wheeling and dealing. Relics were bought, sold, and occasionally misplaced, leading to no small amount of ecclesiastical drama. Pilgrims might have been seeking salvation, but the towns and churches were banking on their pocketbooks. It was the medieval equivalent of a tourist trap, where faith met fiscal policy head-on. With all this cash flow, it's no surprise that these towns became economic powerhouses. Inns, taverns, and markets sprang up, catering to the never-ending stream of weary travelers. Prices could be as unpredictable as the weather, with opportunistic merchants ready to charge a premium for everything from a bed to a bowl of stew. If you think airport prices are bad, try haggling for a stale loaf of bread when you're the only game in town. The cost of a simple meal could rival a week's wages, and that's before you even considered picking up a souvenir. Speaking of sustenance, these towns offered a rare chance to indulge in something other than gruel and hardtack. The local fare might have included meats, cheeses, and the occasional vegetable, assuming you could afford it. But beware the allure of luxury. Overindulgence could lead to a medieval hangover that no amount of holy water could cure. On the spiritual front, reaching your destination wasn't just about ticking off a box on your heavenly to-do list. It was a complex dance of ritual and reverence. You'd attend masses, participate in processions, and maybe even receive a blessing or two. But in these heady times, the spiritual was tightly intertwined with the political. Pilgrimages could be a show of allegiance, a means to curry favor with the church or the crown. In the tumultuous landscape of medieval Europe, where borders shifted like sand dunes, a pilgrimage could be as much a political statement as a pious act. The political tensions could be palpable. Rivalries between cities, between secular and ecclesiastical authorities, and among the ever-shifting alliances of lords and barons added layers of intrigue to your journey. Supporting one shrine over another could signal your political leanings, aligning you with certain factions or interests. It was like navigating a medieval minefield, where one misstep could land you in hot water, or at least in an argument at the local tavern. And then there were the social dynamics. Pilgrimages weren't just spiritual marathons. They were social events, a chance to rub shoulders with people from all walks of life. Nobles, peasants, and clergy might find themselves side by side at the same altar, sharing stories, exchanging news, and sometimes even forming unlikely alliances. It was a melting pot of medieval society, where the rigid hierarchies of home were momentarily set aside in the pursuit of a common goal. But let's not romanticize this too much. The journey might have been a great equalizer on paper, but class distinctions didn't just disappear. Nobles traveled with retinues, while peasants made do with what they could carry. The disparity was as evident as a knight in shining armor amidst a sea of mud-streaked serfs. Yet, the shared hardship forged bonds that might otherwise have been unthinkable, if only for the duration of the journey. As you finally stood before the relics, the culmination of your pilgrimage, you might have felt a surge of emotion, relief, joy, maybe even a touch of disappointment. After all, surviving the journey was no small feat, a testament to your resilience and faith. But beyond the personal, your pilgrimage was a thread in the larger tapestry of medieval life, contributing to the economic, political, and social fabric of the age. So, as the incense wafted through the air and the choir's voices soared, you weren't just a solitary seeker of salvation. You were part of a complex, bustling world that thrived on the movement of people and ideas. And as much as the relics promised divine connection, the real miracle might just have been the journey itself, a testament to the endurance and adaptability of the human spirit. And with that, the road behind you fades into memory, a tale to be told and retold, embellished with each retelling, as all good stories are. But don't put away your walking stick just yet. The pilgrimage might be over, but the stories and the lessons are far from finished. There's more to uncover in this medieval saga, so hold tight for the next chapter in our journey through history's winding paths. As you stowed your walking stick and prepared to depart from the bustling pilgrimage site, the journey's true impact began to unfold. Was this epic trek the spiritual cleanse you'd hoped for, or more like a medieval midlife crisis that left your wallet feeling lighter than a saint's feather? Let's sift through the relic dust and see what treasures or troubles you're taking back home. First, the personal toll. You've spent months on the road, navigating more drama than a season of medieval reality TV. Your feet are a blistered mess, a testament to the kilometers trudged over cobblestones and muddy paths. You're probably down a few pounds, unless you overindulged at the local taverns. Not to mention, the experience has likely aged you a few years. Nothing like dodging bandits and arguing with innkeepers to add a wrinkle or two. But beyond the physical, there's the emotional and spiritual side. Did you find the divine enlightenment you were seeking? That's a tough one. But here's the kicker. Even if the heavens didn't part and angels didn't descend to sing your praises, the journey itself was transformative. You've seen the world beyond your village, met people from all walks of life, and maybe picked up a few choice swear words in a foreign tongue. In a world where most never traveled beyond their hometowns, this was a revelation, a crash course in the vastness of human experience. Back home, you'd likely find your social standing bolstered. Surviving a pilgrimage was the medieval equivalent of a badge of honor, a spiritual merit badge pinned to your soul. Neighbors might gather around to hear your tales, embellished no doubt with the occasional dragon or miraculous event. Your stories could elevate you from the mundane to the remarkable, a living testament to faith and fortitude. And yes, maybe you'd exaggerate a bit. Who wouldn't want to spice up a tale with a miraculous healing or a narrow escape from a fiery inferno? Economically, however, the pilgrimage was a double-edged sword. On one hand, returning home alive and with stories to tell could lead to new opportunities. Alliances formed on the road might translate into trade connections or even a favorable marriage match. But let's not forget the cost. You might have harked the family cow to fund this so-called spiritual sabbatical. The financial hit could linger, a reminder that divine favor doesn't pay the bills. Yet, in a society where spiritual currency often trumped the monetary kind, that was a trade-off many were willing to make. Zooming out from your personal odyssey, let's consider the broader impact on medieval society. Pilgrimages were more than individual quests. They were cultural phenomena that reshaped communities. The influx of pilgrims transformed sleepy towns into booming centers of commerce. Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, and other pilgrimage hotspots thrived, their economies buoyed by the constant flow of travelers. Inns, taverns, and markets flourished, and with them, the local economies. The pilgrimage was the medieval version of a tourist boom where faith fueled financial prosperity. Politically, these journeys were a subtle yet potent force. They provided a common ground where the otherwise fractured Europe could unite, albeit temporarily. Pilgrimages transcended borders, connecting disparate regions through shared spiritual goals. They fostered a sense of pan-European identity long before the EU was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. This was a medieval melting pot, where languages, ideas, and even fashion trends were exchanged along the dusty roads. The cross-pollination of cultures enriched medieval society, laying the groundwork for the complex tapestry of European identity. Yet, for all its romantic allure, the pilgrimage wasn't without its darker side. The relentless pursuit of relics sometimes led to corruption within the church, with forgery and theft not uncommon. Relics were big business, and where there's money, there's often a trail of ethical quandaries. This commercialization of the sacred sometimes muddled the line between devotion and deception, prompting questions that reverberated through the ages. In the grand scheme, the pilgrimage was a reflection of medieval life itself, a blend of faith, fear, and fervor, driven by the eternal quest for meaning and belonging. It was an adventure fraught with peril and promise, where the journey often mattered more than the destination. The pilgrimage was a microcosm of human existence, with all its trials and triumphs, offering a glimpse into the resilience of the human spirit. So, would you lace up those leather foot coverings and do it all over again? That depends. If you're yearning for a soul-stirring adventure, the kind that tests your mettle and expands your horizons, a pilgrimage might just be your cup of medieval mead. But if you're more inclined to enjoy the comforts of home, perhaps it's best to live vicariously through the tales of others. In the end, the pilgrimage was as much about the journey within as it was about the physical trek. It was a testament to human endurance and adaptability, a reminder that the quest for meaning is as old as humanity itself. And while the roads may no longer be filled with blisters and bandits, the echoes of those journeys still resonate, a reminder of the timeless pursuit of the divine amid the dust and drama of everyday life. As you ponder the journey you've undertaken, remember that history is more than just dates and events. It's the story of people, of you, me, and those who walked before us. It's a tapestry woven with the threads of faith, hope, and the occasional misstep, each adding to the rich and complex fabric of our shared past. And that, dear listener, is the true legacy of the medieval pilgrimage, a journey that continues, in one form or another, to this very day. If you ever found yourself stuck under a rain cloud in ancient Gaul, you might have heard the Celts whispering the secrets of the universe to the trees. Well, okay, maybe not the universe, but certainly the world around them. The Celts didn't just see nature as a backdrop for their lives. It was the main event, the headliner in their cosmic festival. Picture this: sacred groves where the rustling leaves were like ancient whispers, and every tree had a story. If you were a druid, you were basically the celebrity spokesperson for Mother Nature herself. Now, before we dive into the mystical woods and the druidic VIP parties, there's a little housekeeping to do. The Celts didn't leave us any handy guidebooks or Yelp reviews about their religious practices. Nope, they were more the verbal storytelling types, which is all fine and dandy until you realize that the Romans, with their love for ink and papyrus, got hold of the narrative. And let's be honest, the Romans had an agenda. They were like the ancient world's tabloid journalists, great at a scoop, but not always the most balanced storytellers. Take Julius Caesar, for instance. While he was busy conquering Gaul, he also moonlighted as an amateur ethnographer, scribbling down notes about the Celts. But let's just say his notes were less National Geographic and more Fox News. According to our Roman friends, Druids were these mysterious, all-knowing figures, part shaman, part politician. They could tell you the future, talk to the dead, and probably even fix your chariot. But remember, the Romans were also selling the idea that these Druids were leading crazy rituals and possibly sacrificing the odd human, which, truth bomb alert, is mostly speculative drama to justify their conquests. So, what were these Druids really up to when they weren't being exaggerated by Roman pens? They were the intellectual elite, the keepers of knowledge, the ones who could memorize entire epics when everyone else was still figuring out how to spell epic. They were the teachers, judges, and spiritual leaders. Think of them as the Swiss Army knife of ancient Celtic society, versatile and indispensable. Nature wasn't just a backdrop for them. It was the textbook, the courtroom, and the church all rolled into one. Sacred groves were the heart of Celtic spiritual life. These were not your average picnic spots. Here, the Celts believed the very essence of the divine resided. Forget temples with grand marble columns. The Celts preferred their sacred spaces au natural. Oaks were particularly revered, standing as silent witnesses to the rituals and gatherings that bound the Celtic tribes together. It's like Mother Nature handpicked her best real estate and said, "Here, have at it. And let's talk festivals," because the Celts loved a good party, especially when it involved a bit of spiritual significance. Picture massive gatherings where the air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, the flicker of bonfires illuminating the night, and the sounds of music and chanting mingling with the crackle of flames. These were not mere celebrations of the harvest or the changing seasons. They were full-blown spiritual extravaganzas. Samhain, for instance, was their version of New Year's Eve, Halloween, and a spiritual conference all rolled into one. It was the time when the veil between worlds was thinnest, and you could practically shake hands with your ancestors. Yet, while the Celts were busy weaving their lives into the tapestry of nature, the Romans were watching with raised eyebrows and a lot of judgment. To the Romans, the Celts were the wild, untamed cousins who lived just a little too close to the edge of civilization. But what the Romans saw as chaos, the Celts saw as harmony. Being one with nature wasn't just a lifestyle choice, it was a spiritual necessity. So next time you find yourself in a forest, take a moment to listen to the wind, maybe even hug a tree. You'll be tapping into a tradition as old as time, where nature was the ultimate power and the Druids were the keepers of its most profound secrets. And while you're at it, give a nod to those ancient Celts who knew that the real magic was always happening just outside the city limits. And speaking of ancient secrets and timeless whispers, let's dive headfirst into the Celtic pantheon, where gods and goddesses wove the very fabric of life with a flair for the dramatic that would make even the most seasoned soap opera writers envious. The Celts, those crafty storytellers, didn't just settle for your run-of-the-mill deities lounging on cloud palaces or tossing thunderbolts like Zeus on a caffeine high. No, their gods were a dynamic bunch, constantly morphing and mingling with the mortal realm in ways that would make a shape-shifting chameleon look like an amateur. At the heart of this divine drama was Dagda, the good god, though not in the moral sense. More like good, as in jack of all trades. Chief, druid, and warrior all rolled into one. Think of him as the ultimate multitasker, wielding a club that could dish out life and death like a cosmic seesaw. And with his cauldron of plenty, he was the original host with the most, ensuring no guest ever left his table hungry. If the Celts had Yelp, Dagda would have been a 5-star chef with a waiting list. But wait, there's more. Enter Morrigan, the sultry goddess of war and fate. She's the kind of deity who'd show up at a battle not to fight, but to forecast doom, often taking the form of a raven. Her presence was like a cosmic spoiler alert. If she was around, you knew things were about to get, well, messy. It's as if the Celts understood that life was a mix of light and shadow, and Morrigan was there to remind them that even in victory, the spectre of fate was never far behind. Speaking of shadows, let's shine a light on the quirks of Celtic mythology. Take shape-shifting, for example. In these legends, gods and heroes would switch forms like they were changing outfits for a night out. Cu Chulainn, the legendary warrior, once transformed into a terrifying Hulk, his body twisting and bulging in a supernatural rage. Meanwhile, the goddess Ceridwen brewed a potion of inspiration so potent it turned a boy into a salmon, then a hawk, and eventually a wise old man. It's like a Celtic version of Freaky Friday, but with more feathers and fur. And let's not forget the animals. Oh, the animals. The Celts had a thing for them, and not just as companions or livestock. Animals were symbols, messengers from the gods, and sometimes the gods themselves in disguise. Stags, boars, and horses galloped through their myths, each hoofbeat echoing with divine significance. To the Celts, these creatures weren't just part of the landscape. They were the living, breathing embodiment of the sacred and the wild. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of worship. You see, honoring a pantheon of shape-shifting deities wasn't just about tossing a few coins into a fountain and calling it a day. The Celts were all about the grand gesture. Sacrifices were a major part of their religious rituals, and while the Romans loved to paint these as scenes straight out of a horror flick, the reality was a bit more nuanced. Yes, they offered animals, and occasionally humans, but these acts were deeply symbolic, a way to maintain balance and harmony with the divine forces. So, what happened to all those cattle that met their end in the name of religious devotion? Well, in Celtic society, cattle were basically the Bitcoin of their day, a crucial measure of wealth and status. Sacrificing a cow wasn't just an offering. It was a serious investment in divine goodwill. It's like sending a fruit basket to the gods, but way more expensive, and with a lot more mooing involved. And let's not forget the feasting. After a sacrifice, the community would gather for a grand banquet, a reminder that these rituals were as much about social cohesion as they were about spiritual duties. In the end, the Celts' approach to the divine was anything but conventional. Their gods were as complex and unpredictable as the world they inhabited, and their rituals reflected a deep understanding of nature's duality, creation and destruction, life and death, all swirling in a cosmic dance. While the Romans might have scoffed, labeling them as barbaric or savage, the Celts knew that the real magic lay in embracing the chaos and finding sacred meaning in every twist and turn of life's unpredictable journey. And just like that, we've only scratched the surface of Celtic spirituality. There's more to explore, so stay with me as we continue to peel back the layers of myth and history, one fascinating story at a time. Let's take a closer look at the Druids, the intellectual elite of the ancient Celtic world. These weren't just the folks who could recite poetry under a full moon or whip up a potent herbal brew. Nope, the Druids were the rock stars of Celtic society, the kind who could make even the most seasoned Roman senator break out in a cold sweat. Now, here's the thing about Druids. Becoming one wasn't as simple as donning a robe and grabbing a mistletoe branch. Training to be a Druid was like signing up for the world's longest graduate program. We're talking a 20-year odyssey that would make even the most dedicated PhD candidates wince. The exact curriculum is a bit of a mystery, what with the whole oral tradition thing, but it likely included a mix of lore, history, poetry, and the secrets of nature itself. Think Hogwarts meets Harvard, but with more trees and fewer Quidditch matches. During this marathon education, Druids memorized thousands of verses. They were the keepers of Celtic lore and lore, the walking, talking encyclopedias of their time. And let's not forget their role as judges. When disputes arose, it was the Druids who settled them, often using their profound knowledge of tradition and human nature to deliver verdicts that were as respected as they were feared. But here's where things get really interesting. The Druids weren't just intellectuals. They wielded significant political power, often advising kings and tribal leaders. In some cases, they could even make or break a ruler's career with a well-placed prophecy or a strategic blessing. Imagine being a king and knowing that the guy in the cloak could sway your entire court with a few choice words. It's no wonder the Druids had their own kind of celebrity status, part priest, part politician, and part oracle. Their influence wasn't just limited to the Celtic lands. Either the Romans, ever the astute observers of power structures, were both fascinated and terrified by the Druids. To the Romans, the Druids represented a kind of power they couldn't easily conquer with legions and swords. These were people who wielded influence over vast numbers of tribes through sheer intellect and charisma, a form of soft power that was both alien and threatening to the Roman way of life. Now, let's talk about why the Romans were so eager to paint the Druids as sinister, magical figures. Sure, A mysterious enemy makes for a great story. And let's be honest, the Romans loved a good yarn, but there was more to it than that. By portraying druids as dangerous sorcerers conducting bizarre rituals in dark forests, the Romans could justify their conquests as a civilizing mission. It was a classic case of us versus them, with the druids cast as the perfect sinister foil to Roman order and rationality. Of course, the reality was a bit more grounded. While the druids certainly had their mystical elements, they were also practical and deeply connected to the workings of their societies. They understood the rhythms of the natural world and used that knowledge to guide their people through the challenges of life in ancient times. In essence, they were the ultimate mediators between the earthly and the divine, ensuring that their communities thrived in harmony with both. And let's not ignore the irony here. While the Romans were busy demonizing the Druids, they were also borrowing elements of their wisdom. Roman leaders were known to consult Druids for advice, recognizing the deep well of knowledge they possessed. It's a bit like accusing your neighbor of witchcraft while secretly hoping they'll help you with your garden. In the end, the Druids were a complex blend of myth and reality. They were the intellectual heavyweights of their day, wielding a power that was as much about persuasion and wisdom as it was about ritual and mystery. While the Romans might have scoffed at their beliefs, the Druids knew the true power lay in understanding both the seen and the unseen, navigating the delicate balance between nature and society with a wisdom that remains as intriguing today as it was 2 millennia ago. Stay tuned, because there's more to this tale of magic, mystery, and ancient power. We'll continue peeling back the layers of Celtic society, revealing the intricate tapestry of history that weaves through their world, one fascinating thread at a time. Now, as we step further into the Celtic world, let's tackle the vibrant tapestry of life itself, the festivals. These weren't just excuses to break out the mead and dance around a fire, though admittedly, who could blame them if they were? No, these gatherings were intricate blends of spirituality and social bonding, fundamental threads weaving through the fabric of Celtic daily life. First up, Samhain, pronounced Samhain, because naturally the Celts loved a good linguistic curveball. This festival was like the Celts' Super Bowl, a grand finale and kick-off rolled into one, marking the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. If you've ever wondered why Halloween has that spooky, otherworldly vibe, you can thank Samhain. The Celts believed that during this time, the veil between the living and the dead was as thin as a politician's promise. Spirits could cross over, and folks would leave out food to appease these otherworldly visitors. Because, let's face it, nobody wants a hangry ghost on their hands. But Samhain wasn't just about ghostly encounters. It was also a time for community and reflection. Bonfires blazed as a symbol of warmth and protection against the incoming darkness, both literal and metaphorical. People gathered around these fires to celebrate, share stories, and perform rituals that would ensure a fruitful year ahead. Here's where the myth-busting comes in. While Samhain might sound like a scene out of a horror movie, it was more about community cohesion and survival strategy than it was about gory rituals. Now, let's fast forward to Beltane, the polar opposite of Samhain in the Celtic calendar. Beltane was all about welcoming summer, fertility, and frankly, a good old-fashioned knees-up. Celebrated on May 1st, it was a heady mix of fire, feasting, and frolicking. The Celts would light bonfires, because why not? And leap over them for good luck and to ward off evil spirits. Picture it, a bunch of Celts jumping over flames, trying not to singe their kilts. Beltane was the ultimate social mixer, where matchmaking took center stage. In fact, many a Beltane tryst ended in marriage, and in a world where alliances were crucial, these unions were as strategic as they were romantic. The significance of these festivals can't be overstated. They were the Celts' way of marking time, ensuring that no one forgot the rhythms of the natural world. Each festival was a reminder of the cyclical nature of life, a way to honor the past, celebrate the present, and prepare for the future. It's like a cosmic 3-for-1 deal, with added bonfire smoke for atmosphere. Now, you might wonder how these ancient traditions survived the relentless march of history. Well, they're like that one hit song from the 80s that never quite leaves the radio. Samhain evolved into Halloween, a night where we still dress up, light pumpkins, and tell tales of the supernatural. Meanwhile, Beltane's spirit lingers on in May Day celebrations, with their maypoles, dances, and nods to the joys of summer. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. These festivals were also practical. The Celts, like any society with one eye on the sky and the other on survival, knew the importance of community gatherings. They were times to settle disputes, form alliances, and let's be real, show off a bit. Imagine the ancient equivalent of the office holiday party, but with more tribal tattoos and fewer awkward karaoke performances. Of course, the Romans had their own opinions about these festivals. To them, the Celts' penchant for fire and feasting seemed barbaric at best, satanic at worst. But the Romans also recognized the power of these gatherings. They were the glue that held Celtic society together, providing structure in a world that seemed, to the Romans at least, wild and unruly. In the end, these festivals were more than just dates on a calendar. They were living traditions that connected the Celts to their environment and each other. They understood that life was a dance of light and shadow, and their festivals were a testament to the enduring power of community and the natural world. It's a lesson that echoes through history, reminding us that sometimes the best way to face the darkness is to light a fire, gather your people, and celebrate the simple act of being alive. And so, as we leave the bonfires of Beltane behind, we'll continue our journey through the Celtic world, exploring the intersection of myth and reality, spirituality and survival, one captivating story at a time. Stay with me, because there's plenty more where that came from, and the ancient Celts are far from done spinning their tales. As we move from the flickering bonfires of Beltane, let's shift our gaze to a time when the Celtic world faced its ultimate plot twist. The Romans crashing the party. When Julius Caesar first laid his eyes on the Celts around 58 BCE, he must have thought, these folks have got more festivals than we have guards. But the Romans weren't just there to critique party planning. Oh no, they had imperial ambitions, and they were about to give the Celts a crash course in Roman realpolitik. Now, here's a fun fact. By 51 BCE, after a series of military campaigns that make Game of Thrones look like a pillow fight, the Romans had conquered Gaul. That's roughly modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland, a hefty chunk of real estate. And what do you do when you conquer a land? You impose your way of life on the locals, of course. Roman roads, Roman baths, and yes, Roman guards, they were all part of the package deal. It was like a cultural takeover, but with more aqueducts and fewer reality TV shows. The Celts, who had been happily communing with nature and throwing epic festivals, suddenly found themselves at the mercy of Roman bureaucracy. Imagine going from a society where the Druids were the rock stars to one where you had to fill out paperwork in triplicate just to hold a harvest festival. Talk about a buzzkill. But the Romans were nothing if not efficient. They systematically dismantled the Druids' power, banning their practices, and in some cases, eliminating them altogether. It was like cancelling the top-rated show on ancient cable TV. But while the Romans were busy trying to stamp out Celtic culture, something else was brewing on the horizon: Christianity. By the 4th century, the religion that started as a small sect in the Roman Empire was gaining serious traction. And with it came a new set of spiritual practices that further eroded the old Celtic ways. The monastic movement, with its emphasis on community and education, began transforming the landscape. Monasteries sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, becoming centers of learning and hubs for the new faith. The spread of Christianity was like replacing a multicolored tapestry with a monochrome mural. Suddenly, those sacred groves and open-air rituals were seen as pagan, and therefore a threat to the new religious order. The Christian missionaries weren't just interested in souls, they were after real estate. Churches were often built right on top of old Celtic sacred sites. It was a savvy move, ensuring that the locals would keep coming back to the same spots, just with a different spiritual playlist. But here's the kicker. Despite these changes, Celtic spirituality didn't just vanish into thin air. It was more like a river going underground, resurfacing in folklore, rituals, and let's face it, a fair bit of romanticism. The Celts had a knack for storytelling, and their myths and legends endured, albeit with a few editorial changes from the Christian scribes. Saints replaced guards, and miracles took the place of magic, but the spirit of the stories remained. And let's debunk a myth while we're at it. St. Patrick didn't drive the snakes out of Ireland because, spoiler alert, there weren't any snakes to begin with. The tale is likely metaphorical, symbolizing the banishment of pagan practices. But it's a great story, and we humans do love a good narrative. So, what's the legacy of all this cultural upheaval? Well, for starters, it left us with a rich tapestry of myths and legends that continue to captivate the imagination. From the misty isles of Avalon to the haunting beauty of the Morrigan Celtic mythology remains a source of fascination, inspiring everything from literature to blockbuster movies. And while modern-day enthusiasts might romanticize the Celts as mystical forest dwellers with an unbroken line to the divine, the reality was a bit more complex and, dare we say, a tad more bureaucratic. The Celts were masters of adaptation, and their culture, though transformed, never truly disappeared. Instead, it melded with the new influences, creating a unique hybrid that still echoes in places like Ireland and Scotland today. Think of it as cultural recycling. A bit of the old, a splash of the new, and a whole lot of resilience. In the end, the decline of Celtic religious practices wasn't a story of defeat, but one of transformation. The Celts may have lost their political autonomy, but their spiritual legacy endured, evolving with the times while retaining a core of ancient wisdom. It's a testament to the enduring power of culture and the human spirit's ability to adapt and thrive, even in the face of overwhelming change. So next time you find yourself wandering through a forest, or perhaps when you light a candle on a dark winter night, remember the Celts. They understood the magic of the natural world, and while their gods may have taken a backseat to other deities, their spirit lives on in the stories we tell and the traditions we cherish. And that, dear listeners, is the real legacy of the ancient Celts, a reminder that while empires rise and fall, the human connection to the sacred and the natural endures. Now that's a story worth telling. If you stumbled into the quaint little village of Domrémy in 1412, you'd probably wonder why on earth anyone would choose to live here. Nestled in the northeastern corner of France, this was no bustling metropolis, but rather a small, muddy collection of thatched roofs and hopeful dreams. It was here, in this sleepy hamlet, that one of history's most unlikely heroes was born. Joan of Arc, a girl who would rise from these modest beginnings to become a national symbol and a canonized saint. Life in Domrémy was far from glamorous. The village was a blip on the map, a place where the biggest social events might be the annual harvest, or if you were lucky, a particularly juicy scandal involving the neighbor's pig. The 100 Years' War was raging on, a conflict so long that by the end of it, people probably forgot what started it in the first place. France was divided like a bad divorce settlement, with the English and Burgundians squabbling over territory like two dogs over a bone. But more on those medieval soap opera antics later. Joan was born into a peasant family, the daughter of Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Remay. Her parents might not have had much in terms of material wealth, but they were rich in faith and practicality. Jacques was a farmer, working the land like his life depended on it, because, well, it did. Isabelle, meanwhile, instilled in Joan a deep sense of piety. Sundays were reserved for Mass, and Joan's childhood was steeped in religious devotion, setting the stage for her later claims of divine inspiration. At the tender age of 13, when most kids today are busy figuring out how to avoid chores, Joan's life took a turn for the bizarre. She began to hear voices, though not the kind that suggest a call to the local psychiatrist. No, these were the voices of saints, St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret, to be exact. They told her that she had a mission, a divine mandate to save France from its endless woes. Now, if you or I started hearing voices telling us to lead a country to glory, we'd probably chalk it up to too much cheese before bed. But Joan, in her unshakable faith, believed wholeheartedly. You have to hand it to her. Joan's visions came at a time when France desperately needed a hero. The country was a mess, like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. The English were occupying large swaths of French territory, and the rightful heir to the throne, Charles Roman VII, was sitting in Chinon, probably wondering if his kingdom would ever be more than a shadow of its former self. Enter Joan, a teenage girl claiming divine guidance with all the confidence of someone who's never been told no. But before she could meet with Charles and convince him of her heavenly mission, Joan had to contend with the skepticism of her own villagers. Picture this. A young girl, in a time when women were expected to marry, manage a household, and not much else, asserting that she was chosen by God to lead an army. People were, understandably, dubious. Yet despite the raised eyebrows and whispers, Joan's faith never wavered. Her conviction was as unyielding as the soil her family tilled. It's easy to romanticize Joan's early life, to paint her as a destined hero from the start. But let's not forget the harsh reality she faced. Her world was one of hard labor and limited opportunities, where life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, assuming you managed to dodge the plague, famine, or a particularly nasty winter. Education was a luxury few could afford, and while Joan never learned to read or write, she possessed a sharp mind and an indomitable spirit. The village of Domremy itself was under constant threat from marauding bands of soldiers, a grim reminder of the ongoing conflict. These were the days when a peasant's fortunes could change with the swing of a sword, and alliances were as fickle as the weather. Joan's upbringing in such turbulent times no doubt influenced her resolve and resilience, traits that would serve her well in the trials ahead. So here we have Joan, a girl from a backwater village with a divine calling and a whole lot of chutzpah. Her visions, whether seen as a gift from God or the product of fervent imagination, set her on a path that would challenge the norms of medieval society and defy the expectations of her gender and class. As the political landscape of France shifted like sand underfoot, Joan's destiny began to unfurl, ready to take the stage in this grand drama of history. In the next act of her story, Joan would leave Domremy, armed with nothing but her faith and a determination as fierce as any knight's sword. But for now, she was just a peasant girl, living in a village that seemed as far removed from the halls of power as you could get. Yet even in this quiet corner of the world, the rumblings of war and destiny were beginning to make themselves heard, paving the way for Joan's meteoric rise and her eventual role in the salvation of France. With the echoes of war clattering like an out-of-tune orchestra in the background, Joan set her sights beyond the sleepy confines of Domremy. It was time to put her divine mandate into action, and that meant convincing someone in power to take her seriously. Enter Robert de Baudricourt, the local military commander stationed at Vaucouleurs, a man who, upon first meeting Joan, probably had the same expression you get when a teenager claims their destiny is to save the world. Skeptical, you bet. In a time when women were about as likely to lead armies as they were to invent the smartphone, Joan's declaration was a hard sell. But Joan was nothing if not persistent. She hounded Baudricourt with the tenacity of a telemarketer, refusing to take no for an answer. Over the course of several months, she visited him 3 times, each encounter a masterclass in medieval persuasion. Picture Joan standing there, a peasant girl in homespun clothes, her eyes blazing with conviction, telling a seasoned soldier that she was chosen by God to lead France to victory. It was a bold move, the kind that either ends in glory or a swift boot out the door. And yet, Joan's sheer audacity was enough to make Baudricourt pause, if only to avoid another awkward conversation with the girl who wouldn't quit. In January 1429, after a particularly intense round of negotiations, or perhaps just to finally have some peace and quiet, Baudricourt relented. Whether he was genuinely convinced or merely tired of Joan's relentless lobbying is up for debate. He gave her a sword, a horse, and a small retinue of men. It was the medieval equivalent of handing over the car keys with a weary, "Fine, go save France if you must." But there was a catch. Joan had to travel dressed as a man. In an era when modesty was more than just a virtue, it was a necessity. Joan's cross-dressing was both practical and scandalous. It was a risky disguise, but in the testosterone-fueled chaos of war, it was the most effective armor against unwanted attention. Her journey to Chinon, where Charles Roman VII awaited, was no leisurely trot through the countryside. It spanned nearly 350 miles, the kind of trek that would have made even the most experienced knights think twice. Joan and her entourage navigated a landscape pockmarked by conflict, where every town had its own loyalties and every road held the potential for peril. The trip took 11 days, each one filled with the grim reality of a nation embroiled in a conflict that had no end in sight. Yet Joan, buoyed by her faith and the voices of her saintly advisers, pressed on. Finally, Joan arrived at Charles Roman VII court, a place where politics and power plays danced more intricately than a courtly waltz. Here, in the grand halls of Chinon, Joan faced her biggest test yet, convincing the Dauphin that this unassuming peasant girl was his ticket to reclaiming the French throne. Charles, who had more than a few reasons to be skeptical, After all, his claim to the throne was about as solid as a sandcastle at high tide. Decided to test Joan's credibility in a manner that was as awkward as it was bizarre. The court arranged for a group of noblewomen to verify her virginity, a test that, in the minds of the medieval French, was somehow linked to her divine mission. The irony of the situation is not lost on us today. Here was a girl who had traversed war-torn lands and faced down hardened soldiers, only to have her fate hinge on such an arcane test. Yet in the convoluted logic of the time, it made sense. Virginity was seen as a sign of purity, a divine endorsement of her claims. Joan passed the test, and with it, she gained a foothold in Charles's court. Her journey from peasant to potential savior was officially underway. Yet, underneath the pageantry and the divine mission, the grim realities of 15th century France simmered. The country was a patchwork of loyalty and betrayal, where allegiances shifted like the wind. The economy was in tatters, ravaged by decades of war and the never-ending demands of a monarchy struggling to hold itself together. Common folk, like Joan's own family, bore the brunt of this chaos, their lives dictated by the whims of distant lords and the fortunes of war. In such desperate times, the legend of Joan of Arc, a simple girl divinely chosen to lead France to victory, was not just appealing, it was necessary. It offered hope, a narrative that transcended the bleakness of reality. Joan's mission was as much about morale as it was about military strategy. She was the spark in a darkened room, the rallying cry that promised a future beyond endless conflict. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. Joan's journey was fraught with challenges, both external and internal. She was stepping into a world dominated by men, a place where politics and power were as treacherous as any battlefield. Her story is one of resolve and resilience, but also of the harsh truths that come with being a symbol in a world that prefers its heroes to fit a certain mold. As Joan prepared for the next stages of her mission, the stakes couldn't have been higher. France was a nation teetering on the brink, its fate hanging in the balance. Joan's arrival at Chinon was just the beginning of a saga that would see her defy expectations and challenge the status quo. But for now, she stood at the threshold of history, her path illuminated by faith and the flickering torch of destiny. The journey from peasant to potential savior was well underway, and the world was about to witness the remarkable story of Joan of Arc unfold. As Joan stood at the cusp of history, her mission became clear. She needed to turn the tide of war at Orleans, a city that had been under siege by the English for months. Picture a game of chess where Joan, the unexpected queen, was about to make her move. But this wasn't your typical board game. It was a life-and-death struggle, with territories and crowns hanging in the balance. The siege of Orleans was no picnic, unless your idea of a picnic involves arrows and crossfire. The year was 1429, and France was in dire straits. The English had been squeezing Orleans like a particularly stubborn tube of medieval toothpaste, hoping to pop the city open and claim a decisive victory. For months, the French defenders had been stuck in a grim waiting game, their morale sinking faster than a lead balloon. Then came Joan, riding in with her divine mandate and a plan to boot. Her arrival was like a shot of espresso to the war-weary French, promising a change when change seemed impossible. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. Joan faced skepticism from seasoned commanders who had been waging war since before she was born. Here she was, a teenage girl, asserting she could do what they hadn't, break the siege. It was like telling a group of Michelin star chefs how to boil an egg. But Joan had a knack for leadership that belied her years. Her confidence was infectious, and soon soldiers were rallying around her banner, inspired by her faith and fervor. Joan's strategy was as bold as her claims. She insisted on leading from the front, a position as risky as it was symbolic. This was no armchair general. She was in the thick of it, commanding with the kind of authority that made hardened warriors take notice. Her plan was to strike the English positions swiftly and decisively, cutting through their ranks with the precision of a master tactician. With no Google Maps to aid her, Joan relied on her instincts and the guidance of those saintly voices. Whether divine intervention or sheer audacity, her actions breathed new life into the beleaguered French forces. The siege lifted in early May, a miraculous turnaround that left the English reeling. Joan's role in this victory cannot be overstated. Her leadership was the catalyst, the spark that reignited the French fighting spirit. She was the X factor, the unexpected element that turned a losing game into a stunning triumph. Of course, this was war, and not a Hollywood script. The victory at Orleans was hard-fought, paid for in blood and sacrifice. The French army had to surmount formidable odds, and Joan's presence alone didn't guarantee victory. But it did offer something perhaps even more crucial: hope. Let's take a moment to address the myth-making machine that history often becomes. Joan's story has been polished to a fine sheen over the centuries, her deeds sometimes exaggerated or misrepresented. Did she single-handedly save France? Not quite. War is a complex beast, and while Joan's influence was profound, many factors contributed to the eventual French successes. But her role at Orleans was undeniably pivotal. She was the face of a new French resolve, her presence a rallying cry for a nation weary of defeat. Amidst the chaos of war, Joan's personal life was equally tumultuous. Her cross-dressing, initially a practical decision to blend with the soldiers, became a point of contention. It was scandalous, sure, but also ingenious. In a world where a woman's place was not on the battlefield, Joan's attire was both her armor and her statement. It challenged norms and protected her from unwanted attention, allowing her to focus on her mission. Her achievements at Orleans catapulted Joan into the limelight, and she became a living legend almost overnight. The political landscape shifted as the French saw a glimmer of hope where before there had been none. The economy, battered by years of conflict, needed this morale boost as much as the soldiers did. A win at Orleans was more than a military victory. It was a psychological one, a signal that the tide was turning in favor of the French. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Joan's journey was far from over, and the path ahead was fraught with challenges. Her success at Orleans was a double-edged sword, bringing both acclaim and scrutiny. As she prepared for her next steps, the stakes continued to climb, and the world watched to see if this young woman could continue to defy the odds. The legend of Joan of Arc was still being written, and history had plenty more surprises in store. In the grand tapestry of the 100 Years' War, Joan was a bright thread, weaving her way through the chaos with determination and fire. Her story was one of grit and grace, a testament to the power of belief in a time of despair. The Siege of Orleans was her proving ground, stage where she demonstrated her remarkable capabilities and set the tone for the battles yet to come. As the dust settled, Joan stood ready to carry her mission forward, her place in history not just as a saint, but as a soldier who changed the course of a nation. As Joan's reputation blossomed after Orleans, she became the medieval equivalent of a rock star, minus the groupies and pyrotechnics, but with plenty of political intrigue. Her next big gig, Rheims, where Charles Roman VII would be crowned, thanks largely to her efforts. This wasn't just any coronation, it was a game-changer in the epic saga of the 100 Years' War. Now, why was Rheims such a big deal? Well, crowning Charles in Rheims was like getting a blue checkmark on medieval Twitter. It was the traditional site for French coronations, imbued with a legitimacy that no other city could offer. Think of it as the Vatican of French kingship. Charles's claim to the throne had been about as shaky as a Jenga tower in an earthquake, but with Joan's backing, he was about to solidify his rule. In July 1429, Joan led Charles to Rheims, navigating through enemy territory with all the finesse of a grandmaster chess player. Her presence was magnetic, drawing soldiers and townsfolk alike to her cause. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol, a living embodiment of France's divine right to sovereignty. Imagine the scene. Charles in his finest regalia, Joan standing beside him in her trademark armor, the cathedral echoing with the chants of those who saw in her the hope of a nation reborn. But as the crown settled on Charles's head, Joan's star began to wane. The political landscape was as treacherous as any battlefield, filled with figures who saw her less as a savior and more as a threat. You see, Joan's meteoric rise was a double-edged sword. Sure, she had galvanized the French forces, but she also upset the status quo, and nothing makes political figures twitchier than change. Her celebrity status was both her armor and her Achilles' heel. While the common folk adored her, calling her the Maid of Orleans with a reverence usually reserved for saints, the nobility was less enthused. To them, she was a wild card, unpredictable and dangerously popular. It's the classic tale of the underdog upsetting the apple cart, and in medieval France, that cart was loaded with power-hungry nobles and nervous courtiers. By 1430, Joan's luck took a nosedive that would make a soap opera plot twist look tame. Captured by the Burgundians during a skirmish at Campigny, she found herself at the mercy of those who had every reason to see her fall. If you ever wondered what medieval justice looked like, Joan's trial was the ultimate kangaroo court. Picture this, an ecclesiastical trial where fairness was about as present as a snowball in the Sahara. The charges against Joan ranged from the absurd to the downright laughable. Cross-dressing, heresy, witchcraft, you name it, they threw it at her. Her attire, which had been a practical choice in the thick of battle, became exhibitor in this farce of a trial. It's like accusing someone of jaywalking on the highway to hell. The logic went something like this. If she wore men's clothes, she must be in league with the devil. Never mind the fact that these clothes had protected her from assault and allowed her to lead effectively. The trial, held in Rouen, was less about justice and more about making an example of the girl who had dared to challenge the established order. Joan's defense was as straightforward as it was eloquent, but in a court where the outcome was predetermined, her words were like shouting into the void. The irony, Joan's unwavering faith, the very thing that had propelled her to greatness, became the weapon used against her. Her visions, once seen as divine, were now twisted into evidence of her supposed heresy. In May 1431, Joan was convicted and sentenced to death by burning, an execution method that was as much about public spectacle as it was about punishment. The flames that consumed her were meant to extinguish her influence, to erase her from history's stage. But as history would have it, the attempt to snuff out Joan's legacy was as futile as trying to put out a wildfire with a garden hose. What the English and their allies didn't count on was the enduring power of Joan's story. Her martyrdom only cemented her status as a symbol of French unity and resilience. In a bitter twist of fate, the very act meant to diminish her only amplified her legend. Joan of Arc, the girl from Domremy, was gone, but the myth was just getting started. So where did this leave France? Charles Roman VII, now securely on the throne, owed much to Joan's vision and valor. Her life and death were critical chapters in the broader narrative of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that would grind on for another 2 decades before France finally emerged victorious. Joan's legacy was a rallying point, her story a testament to the power of faith and the human spirit. The economic context of Joan's time was a bleak backdrop to her luminous tale. The war had ravaged the land, and the peasantry, Joan's own people, bore the brunt of the hardship. Fields lay fallow, villages were abandoned, and the toll on the populace was immense. Yet even in such dire circumstances, Joan's story offered hope, a narrative that spoke to the heart of a nation yearning for peace and prosperity. Joan's trial and execution were not just about silencing a dissenting voice. They were a reflection of the broader political machinations at play. In a world where alliances shifted with the wind and power was the ultimate currency, Joan was a pawn caught in the crossfire of larger forces. Her life was a reminder that even in the darkest times, the actions of a single individual could resonate far beyond their own lifetime. As we wrap up this chapter of Joan's story, let's remember that her tale is not just one of martyrdom, but of enduring impact. Her presence in the annals of history is a testament to the complexities of human nature and the enduring power of belief. Joan of Arc may have been a pawn in the political games of her time, but her legacy is that of a queen, an indomitable spirit whose story continues to inspire and provoke, challenging us to question the narratives we hold dear. With her tragic end, Joan's story takes a pause, but the echoes of her life reverberate through the corridors of history. The myth and reality of Joan of Arc offer us a rich tapestry of courage, conviction, and the unyielding pursuit of one's destiny. Her legacy is a reminder that even in a world fraught with division and strife, a single voice can rise above the chaos, leaving an indelible mark on the sands of time. As Joan's story settles into the pages of history, we find ourselves grappling with the curious aftermath of her life, a tale that continues to unfold long after the flames of her martyrdom have flickered out. You see, Joan's legacy wasn't just left to simmer quietly in the annals of French history. No, it was tossed into the medieval equivalent of a spin cycle, emerging as a symbol that transcended the brutal realities of her time. The posthumous trial, a sort of legal resurrection, and her eventual canonization are chapters in this narrative that that speak volumes about the enduring power of redemption, and dare I say, a good PR campaign. Let's rewind a bit. After Joan's execution in 1431, you might think the story ends there, but in a twist worthy of any epic, the wheels of justice, or at least a semblance of it, began to turn again. Fast forward to 1456, and the sands of political allegiance had shifted. Charles Roman VII, perhaps feeling the weight of guilt or the pull of public opinion, ordered a retrial. This time, it wasn't about proving Joan's guilt, but rather clearing her name. The posthumous trial was essentially a mea culpa from a king who owed his crown, in part to the very woman he'd failed to save. This retrial was a spectacle in its own right. Witnesses, many of whom had known Joan personally, came forward to testify. Their accounts painted a picture of a woman of unwavering faith and remarkable resolve, a far cry from the heretic portrayed in her original trial. The outcome: Joan was exonerated, her name restored, her reputation rehabilitated. It was a rare instance of medieval justice, giving a nod to fairness, albeit 25 years too late. But why did it take nearly 500 years for Joan to be canonized? You'd think that exoneration would fast-track her to sainthood. Right. Not so fast. The wheels of the Vatican move with the speed of a snail on a lazy Sunday. Joan was finally canonized in 1920, decision that reflected not just her personal virtues, but also the shifting sands of religious politics and national identity. By the time Pope Benedict XV declared her a saint, the world had changed dramatically. France, now a secular republic, found in Joan a unifying figure, a symbol of national pride that transcended the church-state divide. Her canonization was as much about affirming French identity as it was about recognizing her sanctity. Now, let's talk myth-busting. How did a peasant girl from a backwater village become the embodiment of French nationalism? The answer lies in the potent mix of human longing for heroes and the narrative alchemy of time. Joan's story, infused with elements of martyrdom, divine intervention, and earthly triumphs, was tailor-made for mythologizing. It's the kind of story that invites embellishment, a rags-to-riches tale with a tragic twist, wrapped in the comforting cloak of destiny. Yet, as we peel back the layers of legend, we find a more nuanced picture. Joan was indeed a remarkable figure, but she wasn't a lone savior. Her victories were collective efforts, the result of strategic alliances and the grit of countless unnamed soldiers. The image of Joan single-handedly turning the tide of war is as much a product of romanticism as it is of reality. Her legacy, however, is undeniable. She inspired a nation at a time when hope was as rare as a warm winter. Joan's story, with its blend of heroism and tragedy, offers us a mirror to our own desires for meaning and redemption. It's a reminder of the power of belief, not just in a divine mandate, but in the potential for change against all odds. Her posthumous trial and canonization are more than just historical footnotes. They're testaments to the complex interplay of faith, politics, and identity that continues to shape our world. In the end, Joan of Arc is remembered as a saint, a martyr, and a legend, a trinity of roles that encapsulates the breadth of her impact. Her life and legacy challenge us to look beyond the surface of historical narratives, to question the myths we inherit and the truths we construct. Joan's story, both as it was lived and as it has been told, invites us into a dialogue with the past, urging us to see history not as a static record, but as a dynamic tapestry woven from the threads of human experience. So, as we wrap up this journey through Joan of Arc's life, what are we left with? A tale that defies easy categorization, a legacy that continues to resonate. Joan's story is a testament to the enduring power of courage and conviction, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, the human spirit can shine brightly. Her life may have ended in tragedy, but her legacy is one of triumph, a beacon for those who dare to dream beyond the confines of their circumstances. As we close the book on Joan of Arc, we do so with a sense of awe and inspiration, her story a timeless reminder of what it means to stand unwavering in the face of adversity. The Mughal Empire, a grandiose civilization that left behind architectural wonders so magnificent they make the modern cityscape look like an uninspired game of Sim City. Now, before you get too swept up in the romance of onion domes and minarets, let's get one thing straight. The Mughals weren't just a bunch of history's interior decorators. They were a formidable force that blended ambition with artistry and turned the Indian subcontinent into their personal canvas. We're talking about a dynasty that took go big or go home to heart. If their homes were sprawling palaces, and their big was a mausoleum so immense it could probably swallow your neighborhood whole. So who were these Mughal maestros? Our story kicks off with Babur, the empire's founding father, who was as much a poet as he was a warrior. Born in 1483, Babur was a descendant of Timur on his father's side and Genghis Khan on his mother's. Talk about pedigree. He trotted into the Indian subcontinent in 1526 with ambitions as high as the Himalayas. Babur's claim to fame was the Battle of Panipat, where he defeated the Sultan of Delhi with a nimble army of 12,000 against a force of 100,000. If you think that sounds like an overblown underdog story, just remember that Babur had gunpowder. And in the 16th century, gunpowder was like the cheat code no one else had unlocked yet. But Babur wasn't interested in just winning battles. He was drawn to the idea of legacy, and what better way to leave your mark than in stone and marble? His love for gardens was legendary. He designed them with more precision than your favorite landscape architect. These gardens, like the famous Charbagh design, were four-part paradises that combined the symmetry of Persian aesthetics with the lushness of Indian flora. Babur laid the groundwork, quite literally, for what would become a Mughal obsession, constructing monuments that would outlast their creators, as if taunting time itself. Enter Akbar the Great, Babur's grandson, whose ego could rival even the tallest of his empire's minarets. Born in 1542, Akbar ascended to the throne at the tender age of 13, because nothing says childhood like ruling an empire. His reign, lasting nearly 50 years, saw an architectural boom that would have made even the most ambitious city planners blush. Akbar established the city of Fatehpur Sikri, a sandstone marvel that was essentially a 16th-century flex. Built over a span of 15 years, this city was more than a royal residence. It was a statement of unity, blending Islamic, Hindu, and Persian architectural elements. Akbar was all about bringing people together, as long as they agreed he was the one doing the bringing. The socio-political climate of the 16th century was a patchwork of alliances, betrayals, and an occasional beheading. The Mughals had a knack for marrying diplomacy with architecture. They didn't just build structures, they built narratives. Each edifice was a testament to their power and a subtle reminder of their benevolence, or so they'd like you to think. The empire's immense wealth, derived from a thriving trade in textiles and spices, was funneled not just into military campaigns, but into the hands of artisans and architects who would etch the Mughal name into the annals of history. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. The Mughals are often romanticized as benevolent rulers who spent their days commissioning beautiful buildings and their evenings penning poetry. But let's not kid ourselves. These emperors were as ruthless as they were refined. The opulence of their courts was matched only by their appetite for power. The construction projects, while undeniably beautiful, were also strategic. The fortresses and cities they built were as much about defense and control as they were about aesthetics. Akbar's Red Fort in Agra, for instance, wasn't just an architectural jewel. It was a stronghold designed to showcase Mughal might. And then there was the labor force, the unsung heroes who toiled under the unforgiving sun to bring these visions to life. Thousands of skilled and unskilled workers, including artisans from across the empire, were employed to create these masterpieces. The sheer manpower required was staggering, and while we marvel at the results today, it's important to remember the human cost behind the grandeur. The Mughals may have funded these projects, but it was the sweat and toil of countless individuals that transformed ambition into reality. As we wrap up this episode of Mughal Magnificence, let's appreciate the empire's architectural zeal not just for its beauty, but for its complexity. The Mughals were more than just builders. They were storytellers, politicians, and strategists who understood the power of a well-placed archway or a meticulously carved facade. They knew that while empires could crumble and rulers could fall, stone and marble would stand the test of time, echoing their legacy through the ages. And that, dear friends, is the true wonder of Mughal architecture, a testament not just to artistic vision, but to the indomitable human spirit that carved it into existence. Now, speaking of monuments that defy both time and logic, let's dive into the architectural enigma that is the Taj Mahal. This isn't just any mausoleum, it's the mausoleum, an ivory-white marble marvel that's been making poets swoon and architects green with envy since it was completed in 1648. But before you get lost in the romance of it all, let's pull back the velvet curtain and peek at the gritty details behind this symbol of eternal love. Shah Jahan, the mind behind the masterpiece, was an emperor with a penchant for grandeur that bordered on the obsessive. And why not? If you're going to memorialize your favorite wife, Mumtaz Mahal, you might as well go all out. Forget flowers and chocolates. This guy built a monument that could be seen from space. If only telescopes had been a thing back then. It wasn't just Shah Jahan's love life that was extravagant. The logistics of constructing the Taj Mahal were equally over the top. Picture this, a sprawling construction site buzzing with the labor of 20,000 workers over 22 years. That's right, folks. While some of us struggled to assemble a flat-pack bookcase over a weekend, Shah Jahan orchestrated a quarter-century-long symphony of stone and sweat. The cost? A cool 32 million rupees, which, accounting for inflation, could finance a small nation's GDP today. This monumental endeavor was more than just a labor of love. It was an economic feat that involved artisans from as far as Europe and the Middle East, each contributing their unique flair to this architectural mixtape. But let's not get too caught up in the romance. The reality check here comes in the form of the human cost. Behind the shimmering marble and intricate inlays were countless craftsmen whose names history didn't bother to remember. They toiled under harsh conditions, no doubt dealing with heat, dust, and the occasional imperial whim. The Taj Mahal wasn't just built on love. It was built on back-breaking labor and a treasury brimming with the wealth of the empire's extensive trade network. This was no mere romantic gesture. It was a colossal display of power and an assertion of Mughal dominance. Now, onto the myth-busting. Legend has it that Shah Jahan planned to build a second, identical mausoleum in black marble, dubbed the Black Taj, on the opposite bank of the Yamuna River. This supposed twin would serve as his own final resting place, creating a monochrome mirror image of the Taj Mahal. While the idea sounds straight out of a fantasy novel, historical evidence supporting this claim is as elusive as a mirage. The story of the Black Taj seems to have originated from the imagination of a French traveler, Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, whose penchant for embellishment rivals that of a tabloid journalist. But why let facts get in the way of a good story? The appeal of the Black Taj myth lies in its dramatic flair, an eternal yin-yang of love and death, black and white, forever separated by the river's flow, the kind of narrative that keeps guidebooks and romantic souls alike coming back for more. Yet, in reality, the only thing Shah Jahan built was an empire-sized mausoleum, not a cosmic chessboard of contrasting tombs. And speaking of romance, let's take a closer look at Shah Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal's story. Often hailed as the ultimate love saga, their relationship was indeed the stuff of epics, albeit with a few less than romantic footnotes. Shah Jahan had 3 wives, but it was Mumtaz who held his heart. She was his confidante, his muse, and evidently the subject of his grandest architectural experiment. However, it's worth noting that their love story unfolded in an era where alliances and power dynamics were as integral to marriage as affection, if not more so. But don't let that burst the bubble entirely. There was genuine affection between them, enough to inspire one of the world's most iconic structures. Mumtaz Mahal, who died at the age of 38, giving birth to their 14th child, was undoubtedly cherished by Shah Jahan. Her early death left a void so profound that the emperor channeled his grief into creating an edifice that would immortalize her memory. As we marvel at the Taj Mahal's ethereal beauty, let's not forget the empire that made it possible, the Mughal administration's ability to mobilize resources, labor, and artistry on an unprecedented scale. Their wealth, primarily derived from the lucrative trade of textiles and spices, was the economic engine that fueled such ambitious projects. The Taj Mahal was as much a product of economic might as it was a testament to personal loss. So, here we are, standing in awe of a monument that's equal parts love letter and imperial propaganda. The Taj Mahal is a testament to the Mughal dynasty's audacity, a structure that defies the ravages of time and the whims of history. It tells a story of an empire at the height of its power, and of an emperor who sought to immortalize his love against the backdrop of an ever-fickle world. But our journey through the wonders of Mughal architecture doesn't end here. We've got more myths to bust, more grandeur to dissect, and more history to unravel. So, stick around, because the story of the Mughals is far from over. There's more to uncover, more to question, and certainly more to admire, as we continue to explore an empire that built its legacy one stone at a time. As we close the chapter on the Taj Mahal's marble-clad melodrama, let's pivot to another tale of Mughal grandeur, one that trades romance for raw power. Welcome to the Red Fort and Fatehpur Sikri, Akbar's audacious architectural ventures that scream empire louder than a battle cry echoing over the plains of Panipat. First up, the Red Fort, Agra's sandstone sentinel. Built between 1565 and 1573, it was more than a pretty face. This fort was Akbar's statement piece, a military fortress wrapped in a regal robe. Picture this: over 94 acres of strategic might, with walls soaring up to 70 feet high, designed to withstand both the elements and enemy ambitions. It was the ultimate VIP room of the Mughal Empire, only instead of velvet ropes, you had moats and battlements. Akbar knew that in a world where alliances were as fickle as a soap opera romance, showing off a fortress was a surefire way to keep frenemies at bay. But behind the facade of imperial might lay a bustling hub of administration and diplomacy. The Red Fort wasn't just a defensive bulwark, it was the nerve center of Mughal governance. Picture a sprawling complex of palaces, halls, and gardens, each serving a specific function in the empire's grand machinery. This place was the medieval equivalent of a high-stakes boardroom, where decisions that shaped the subcontinent were made amidst opulent surroundings. And let's not forget the Diwanai-Khars, a hall where Akbar held court, flanked by advisors and dignitaries, all under the watchful gaze of intricate carvings and inlaid stones. While the Red Fort was a fortress first, Akbar's other pet project, Fatehpur Sikri, was a whole different beast. Built between 1571 and 1585, it was Akbar's attempt at creating a utopia, a city that would rival the splendor of any European capital. This wasn't just a vanity project. It was a bold experiment in governance, architecture, and social engineering. Akbar envisioned Fatehpur Sikri as a melting pot of cultures and religions, a testament to his policy of Salai-Kal, or universal tolerance. He wanted to show that an empire as diverse as his could thrive under a single, benevolent ruler. And what better way to broadcast that message than with a city that was essentially a living, breathing billboard? Yet, despite its grandeur, Fatehpur Sikri turned out to be as impractical as a chocolate teapot. The city was built in an area notorious for its water scarcity, a fact that was somehow overlooked in the planning stages. It was as if Akbar had decided to plant a garden in the middle of a desert, and then wondered why the daisies wouldn't bloom. The resulting logistical nightmare was enough to give even the most seasoned planners a migraine. Without a reliable water supply, the city was doomed to fail as a long-term capital. And by 1585, Akbar had packed up his court and moved back to Agra, leaving Fatehpur Sikri to the elements and the historians. But let's not dismiss Fatehpur Sikri as a mere folly. Despite its short-lived status as a capital, it remained a marvel of Mughal architecture and urban planning. The city boasted some of the era's most exquisite structures, like the Jama Masjid and the Buland Darwaza, the latter standing 54 meters tall, a gateway that could intimidate even the bravest of visitors. These structures were a testament to the architectural prowess of the Mughals, a blend of Hindu, Persian, and Islamic styles that gave the city its unique character. And then there was the economic impact of these grand projects. Building a fortress or a city wasn't just about laying bricks and mortar. It was about mobilizing resources on a colossal scale. The construction of the Red Fort and Fatehpur Sikri employed thousands of artisans, laborers, and craftsmen, all of whom contributed to the Mughal economy in ways that went beyond the purely architectural. The empire's coffers, brimming with wealth from trade in textiles and spices, funded these massive undertakings. But such splendor came at a cost, both financial and human. The labor force endured harsh conditions, long hours, and the whims of imperial ambition, much like the workers who toiled on the Taj Mahal. So, what can we learn from Akbar's architectural escapades? For one, that the Mughals had a penchant for grandiosity that bordered on the impractical. They weren't just building for the present. They were building for posterity, crafting legacies in stone and marble. They understood that while empires could rise and fall, a well-placed archway or a soaring dome could echo through the ages. And perhaps most importantly, they knew that architecture was more than just a physical statement. It was a strategic tool in the arsenal of empire building, a way to project power, influence, and cultural supremacy. As we wrap up this segment of Mughal magnificence, it's clear that the empire's architectural feats were as much about politics and power as they were about aesthetics. The Red Fort and Faidehpur Sikri stand as reminders of a time when rulers weren't just content to sit on thrones. They wanted to reshape the world in their image. They were visionaries, dreamers, and occasionally impractical idealists. But isn't that what makes them fascinating? The Mughals dared to dream big, and in doing so, they left behind a legacy that continues to captivate us today. Stay tuned, dear listeners, because our journey through the Mughal Empire's architectural wonders is far from over. We've got more stories to unravel, more myths to debunk, and more history to explore. So, stick around as we continue to delve into the empire that built its legacy one stone at a time. The best is yet to come. As we continue our journey through the Mughal Empire's architectural legacy, let's detour into the less trodden paths, where lesser-known marvels like the Jama Masjid and Humayun's tomb quietly await their turn in the spotlight. These monuments are the unsung preludes to the grand symphony of Mughal architecture, setting the stage for the later, more famous masterpieces. They're like the opening act at a concert that doesn't get the applause it deserves, but without which the headliner wouldn't make sense. First up, the Jama Masjid of Delhi, a sandstone and marble masterpiece that could easily be mistaken for a royal residence if it weren't for the call to prayer echoing off its walls. Commissioned by Shah Jahan, the same guy who brought us the Taj Mahal, this mosque was completed in 1656 at a cost of 1 million rupees, a princely sum that would have bought enough naan to last a lifetime. But Shah Jahan wasn't in it for the bread. He was crafting a communal space that doubled as a symbol of imperial clout. The mosque's courtyard alone can accommodate 25,000 devotees, making it the architectural equivalent of a massive group hug, or, depending on your viewpoint, a very crowded rock concert. The Jama Masjid isn't just about size, though. It's a testament to the Mughal knack for remixing Persian influences with local flavors, like a historical DJ spinning the greatest hits of Islamic architecture. With its 3 grand gates, 4 towers, and 2 40-meter-high minarets, the mosque is a lesson in symmetry and scale. The use of red sandstone and white marble creates a visual rhythm that's simultaneously awe-inspiring and intimidating. And then there are the intricate inlays and carvings, because why settle for plain when you can have ornate? But let's not romanticize it too much. The construction of this monumental mosque wasn't all spiritual enlightenment and artistic vision. It was also about Shah Jahan flexing his divine right to rule, a colossal reminder that he was not just a ruler of men but a shepherd of souls. This was his way of saying, "Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair," except with more minarets and fewer existential crises. Moreover, the laborers who built it did so under the harsh sun, and the even harsher expectations of an emperor who demanded perfection. Next on our tour is Humayun's tomb, another gem that often gets overshadowed by its more famous siblings. Built in 1570, this mausoleum was commissioned by Humayun's widow, Empress Begum, and it's a love story told in red sandstone and white marble. It's the first example of Mughal architecture with a garden tomb, a precursor to the Taj Mahal that whispers its influence rather than shouting it from the rooftops. The tomb cost about 1.5 million rupees, a small fortune, but a worthy investment in the real estate of eternity. Humayun's tomb is where the Mughal penchant for combining Persian and Indian styles really started to hit its stride. The Persian-style charbagh garden, divided into 4 quadrants, is a nod to the paradise promised in Islamic scripture, while the Indian architectural elements weave it seamlessly into its surroundings. It was designed by Murak Mirza Ghias, a Persian architect who clearly had a knack for turning bricks and mortar into poetry. The tomb's double dome and arched entrances set a blueprint for Mughal monuments to come, like a pilot episode that spawns a hit series. Economically, Humayun's tomb was a microcosm of the Mughal Empire's wealth and resources. The artisans who worked on it were drawn from across the empire, a testament to the Mughal ability to mobilize talent as easily as they did armies. The tomb also served as a statement of stability, a reminder to all who saw it that the Mughals were here to stay, and they'd be doing so in style. It was a power move wrapped in a cultural exchange, with a dash of eternal love thrown in for good measure. But let's cut through the romance and get to the grit. The tomb wasn't just a loving tribute, it was also a strategic move to solidify Humayun's legacy, and by extension, the legitimacy of his successors. This was architecture as propaganda, a mausoleum that doubled as a monument to Mughal dominance. And while Empress Begum's intentions were no doubt heartfelt, the political implications of such a grand project weren't lost on anyone. The tomb was a message in stone. The Mughals were builders of empires, not just mausoleums. So, what do these lesser-known gems teach us about the Mughals? For starters, they were masters of blending aesthetics with practicality, using architecture as a tool for both spiritual and temporal power. They understood that a mosque or a tomb was more than just a building. It was a narrative of authority, a testament to their ability to shape both land and legacy. They were historical alchemists, turning stone and marble into statements of divine right and imperial ambition. As we marvel at these monuments, let's also remember the countless hands that shaped them, the artisans and laborers whose names history has all but forgotten. They were the silent architects of the Mughal narrative, the unsung heroes who turned imperial dreams into tangible reality. Their contribution is as much a part of the story as the emperors who commissioned the works. And with that, dear listeners, we conclude this chapter of our exploration into the architectural wonders of the Mughal Empire. But don't hang up your headphones just yet. There's more to come, more myths to debunk, and more stories to unravel as we continue our journey through an empire that built its legacy one stone at a time. Until next time, keep your wits sharp and your curiosity sharper. There's a whole world of history waiting to be discovered. And here we are, standing on the cusp of decline, peering into the final act of the Mughal architectural saga. For an empire that once boasted monuments that could make even the most stoic of emperors tear up, the descent wasn't just about crumbling facades. It was about unraveling ambitions. So, what went wrong? Why did the empire that gifted the world the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort hit such a spectacular iceberg? First, let's talk economics, because nothing quite says end of an era like an empty treasury. By the time the 18th century rolled around, the Mughals were dealing with an economic hangover that would make even the most spendthrift of rulers wince. The empire had a habit of living large on a diet of relentless expansion and extravagant projects, funded by an ever-dwindling pool of resources. The cost of maintaining such a vast empire, which at its zenith covered nearly 4 million square kilometers, was astronomical. Add to that the fact that trade routes were shifting and competition was heating up, and you've got a recipe for fiscal disaster. A major player in this economic drama was the decline of the once booming textile and spice trades. With European powers circling like vultures, the Mughals found themselves outmaneuvered and undercut. The British East India Company, founded in 1600, wasn't just sipping tea, it was plotting a corporate takeover. Their greed for Indian goods came at a price, and that price was the Mughal monopoly on trade. By the mid-1700, the British had established a stranglehold on trade that squeezed the Mughal economy dry, leaving little room for the kind of lavish architectural projects that once defined the empire. But economic woes were just one part of the story. The Mughal Empire was also undone by a string of emperors who were less great and more meh. The line of succession, which had previously been a mix of strategic alliances and outright warfare, became a revolving door of short-lived reigns and weak leadership. Aurangzeb, the sixth Mughal emperor, reigned from 1658 to 1707, and was a man of contradictions, devout, austere, and ultimately divisive. His religious policies alienated many, and while he expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, he also sowed the seeds of discontent that would later bloom into full-scale rebellion. Post-Aurangzeb, The Mughal throne was more like a game of musical chairs, with emperors changing faster than you could say dynastic instability. This political infighting weakened the central authority, leaving the empire vulnerable to both internal strife and external threats. Regional powers like the Marathas and Sikhs began to rise, challenging Mughal dominance and chipping away at its territories. The once mighty Mughal military found itself stretched thin, unable to defend against multiple fronts. It's the classic tale of overreach, an empire that had grown too large for its own good, like a balloon inflated to its breaking point. And as if that wasn't enough, nature itself seemed to conspire against the Mughals. Famine and disease, those perennial harbingers of doom, swept through the subcontinent, further destabilizing the already teetering empire. The agrarian economy, the backbone of Mughal wealth, was hit hard, leaving farmers destitute, and the empire's coffers even emptier. It's the kind of vicious cycle that no amount of architectural prowess could solve. But let's not forget the allure of myth, even in decline. The romantic image of the Mughal Empire as a land of opulence and grandeur persisted long after the reality had faded. This was an empire that understood the power of narrative, of crafting a story that would outlive its own architects. And in the end, that's exactly what happened. Architectural wonders left behind, from the Taj Mahal to the Jama Masjid, became symbols not just of a bygone era, but of the audacity and ambition that defined it. So, what legacy do these structures leave behind? Well, for starters, they're the ultimate tourist magnets, drawing millions from around the globe who come to gawk at the sheer audacity of Mughal design. They stand as a testament to human ingenuity and the eternal quest to leave a mark on the world. But beyond the selfie sticks and guided tours, these monuments tell a deeper story, a story of empire and ambition, of art and artisanship, and of the indomitable will to create something that transcends time. In a way, the decline of Mughal architecture mirrors the empire's own trajectory, a dazzling rise followed by an inevitable fall, leaving behind echoes and shadows of former glory. These structures are both relics and reminders, standing tall amidst the bustling chaos of modern India as guardians of a history that's as complex as it is captivating. They're a reminder that while empires may crumble, their stories endure, etched in stone and whispered through the ages. So, as we bid farewell to the Mughal architectural marvels, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy they leave behind. A legacy that continues to inspire, to awe, and yes, to tantalize with tales of romance and reality. And perhaps, in reflecting on these monuments, we can find a little piece of that Mughal magic in ourselves. The desire to dream big, to build boldly, and to leave a legacy that stands the test of time. Until next time, keep pondering the past and questioning the narratives, because history is never quite what it seems. In the arid heart of ancient Persia, a legend was born, not under the stars of divine prophecy, but amidst the all-too-human chaos of political ambition and family drama. Meet Cyrus the Great, a man who, if you ask the ancient storytellers, had the kind of birth that would make most soap operas blush. According to Herodotus, the Greek historian whose flair for the dramatic was only rivaled by his love of a good tale, Cyrus was the offspring of a union between royalty and prophecy. The story goes that dreams of his future greatness so terrified his grandfather, Astyages, the king of the Median Empire, that he ordered the infant's death. But as these tales often go, the paranoid old king's plans were foiled by the tender-heartedness of a courtier, leading Cyrus to be raised by a shepherd. It's a narrative that practically screams for a Hollywood adaptation, except, like many legends, probably more fiction than fact. The reality of Cyrus's early life is a bit more, let's call it pedestrian. Born around 600 BCE in Anshan, a small kingdom within the sprawling patchwork of territories that made up the ancient Near East, Cyrus was no mystical shepherd's boy. He was a prince, albeit of a less illustrious lineage than the stories would suggest. His father, Cambyses I, was a local ruler under Median overlordship, and his mother, Mandane, was indeed of Median royal blood. So, while the history books might have spiced up his origin story, Cyrus had the right blend of noble ties and regional clout to make waves in the politically charged atmosphere of the time. Now, let's talk about ambition, the real kind, not the fairy tale variety. Cyrus had it in spades. His ascent wasn't about fulfilling some cosmic destiny. It was about playing a high-stakes game of thrones with a savvy mix of diplomacy and strategic marriages. Talk about networking. Cyrus could have written the ancient world's guide to LinkedIn. Instead of divine interventions, what fueled his rise was an astute sense of timing and alliances that would make a modern-day diplomat green with envy. We should probably address the elephant in the room. How does a guy from Anshan go from being a small-time ruler to the founder of one of history's greatest empires? The answer lies in a clever mix of opportunism and an uncanny ability to capitalize on the discontent simmering just below the surface of the Median rule. The Medes, under King Astyages, were not exactly popular among their subject peoples. Enter Cyrus, who saw an opportunity to unite the fractious tribes and city-states under a banner that promised something new, a semblance of shared prosperity and respect for local customs. Sounds like a political campaign, right? Make Persia great again. Anyone. By 550 BCE, Cyrus had amassed enough support to challenge Astyages directly. The ensuing conflict was less about grand battles and more about strategic defections. In a twist that would have made Machiavelli proud, Astyages' own troops, swayed by Cyrus's promises of a better deal, turned on their king. The Median army, instead of crushing the upstart, found itself part of Cyrus's burgeoning coalition. With Astyages captured and his capital, Ecbatana, under Cyrus's control, the power dynamics of the region shifted dramatically. It's here that we need to pause and appreciate Cyrus's real genius, not as a warrior, but as a unifier. His early conquests were notable not for their brutality, but for their relative leniency. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who were keen on pillage and plunder, Cyrus recognized the value of a more inclusive approach. By respecting the traditions and religions of the lands he conquered, he laid the groundwork for what would soon become a melting pot of cultures under the Persian banner. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the pen, or in this case, diplomacy, truly is mightier than the sword. Of course, none of this made for the kind of legendary tales that bards and scribes love to pen. Where's the glamour in treaties and alliances? But in the cutthroat world of ancient empires, where power was often seized through sheer force, Cyrus's methodology was both revolutionary and remarkably effective. He wasn't just building an empire. He was crafting a legacy of governance that would influence countless rulers after him. As we wrap up this first chapter of Cyrus's story, let's leave behind the myths and focus on the man. A shrewd statesman who knew that the seeds of a great empire were sown not just in the blood of conquest, but in the fertile ground of strategic foresight and alliances. Stay tuned, because Cyrus's next moves would turn this small-time ruler into a name that would echo through the corridors of history, long after the dust of his time had settled. As we move forward in the chronicle of Cyrus the Great, let's pivot from the tangled web of alliances to the battlefield, where Cyrus's ability to conquer wasn't just about charming speeches and strategic marriages. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus had already taken the Median Empire with a blend of diplomacy and a sprinkle of military finesse. But let's not sugarcoat it. Taking over an empire isn't exactly a walk in the park, even with troops defecting to your side like fans at a rock concert. Cyrus's next challenge was to consolidate his hold on the freshly acquired territories. The Median Empire, while now under his banner, was a patchwork quilt of cultures, languages, and local rulers, each with their own agendas. Imagine organizing a family reunion where half the attendees don't speak the same language, and the other half are arguing over who gets the last piece of grandma's pie. Cyrus needed to be both a military strategist and a political therapist, if you will. So, what did Cyrus do? He wrapped up the Median lands into his empire with a strategy that was part military genius, part logistical wizardry. Let's talk numbers. At its height, the Persian Empire stretched over 5 million square kilometers. That's like running a marathon across Europe twice. Keeping such an expanse under control required a system as robust as his ambitions. Enter the satrapy system, a bureaucratic brilliance where local governors or satraps were appointed to oversee different regions. Think of it like franchising a fast food chain. Each satrap had the freedom to run things locally, but the overarching brand, Cyrus's empire, set the rules. But let's not kid ourselves with the idea of a benevolent conqueror handing out policies like opera giving away cars. You get autonomy. You get autonomy. Reality check. Cyrus's empire building was as much about pragmatism as it was about magnanimity. By allowing local customs and religions to flourish, Cyrus minimized rebellion and maximized tax revenue. It was a win-win, so long as you were on his side of the win. One more myth to debunk here. The idea that Cyrus's conquests were bloodless. While his reputation as a lenient ruler is well documented, the initial takeovers weren't exactly peaceful protest marches. The conquest of Lydia, led by the famously wealthy King Croesus, was one such example. Croesus's legendary wealth was so vast that his name became synonymous with riches. But Cyrus, not one to be dazzled by gold, saw an opportunity. The Lydian capital of Sardes fell in a matter of weeks, and Croesus was captured. According to some accounts, Cyrus spared Croesus's life, possibly because executing a king who had once been his ally wasn't great for PR. But make no mistake, the battle for Lydia wasn't a game of chess. It was a full-scale military operation with lives on the line. Now, let's talk about Cyrus's secret weapon, logistics. You can't just waltz into a foreign land and expect to keep your armies fed, clothed, and equipped without a solid plan. Cyrus's forces were a well-oiled machine, capable of moving swiftly across vast distances. He understood that an army marches on its stomach, and his supply chains were almost as legendary as his conquests. It's said that Cyrus introduced a system of roads and relay stations that would later inspire the famous Persian Royal Road. This network allowed messages and supplies to travel rapidly. Think of it as the ancient world's FedEx, minus the tracking numbers. Speaking of logistics, let's not overlook the economic context. Conquering lands isn't just about adding them to your collection like Parkhamen cards. It's about resources, trade routes, and economic dominance. By taking over Lydia, Cyrus gained control of its rich gold deposits and the crucial trade routes that connected the Aegean and Persian worlds. Economic power was a vital pillar of his empire's strength, and Cyrus wielded it as deftly as his sword. But let's not romanticize it too much. Empire building is a dirty business, rife with betrayal, backstabbing, and the occasional coup. Cyrus's reign was no exception. The transition from Median to Persian rule, while smoother than some, still had its share of dissenters. The promise of prosperity under Cyrus was alluring, but not everyone was on board with the new regime. To keep the peace, Cyrus had to be both a diplomat and a disciplinarian. For a moment, let's flash forward to the future. The Cyrus cylinder, often dubbed the first charter of human rights, paints him as a liberator and a respecter of human rights. But while it's a nice story to tell, remember it was still propaganda. Ancient spin-doctoring at its finest. The cylinder was a declaration of policy, not necessarily a reflection of everyday reality for all subjects. It proclaimed religious freedom and the restoration of sanctuaries, which sounds fantastic, but it also served to legitimize Cyrus's rule to his newly acquired subjects, especially in Babylon. So, was Cyrus the benevolent ruler history sometimes portrays him as? The answer is a solid yes and no. His policies were certainly more progressive than many contemporaries, but let's not forget the underlying motives of power consolidation and economic gain. His empire was built on both diplomacy and the harsh realities of conquest, an empire of contradictions, much like the man himself. As we leave Cyrus here, straddling the line between liberator and conqueror, remember that his story is far from over. The empire would continue to grow, facing new challenges and reaching new heights. Cyrus's legacy would be shaped not just by the lands he conquered, but by the way he managed them, through a blend of strategic brilliance and calculated kindness. And as the echoes of his reign reverberate through history, we'll see that his greatest conquest was perhaps not land, but the art of empire itself. Stay tuned, because the story of Cyrus the Great is just getting started, and there are plenty of twists and turns ahead. As Cyrus's story unfolds, we're stepping into the nitty-gritty of governance, where the real magic, or some might say sorcery, of empire building happens. After all, conquering lands is one thing, but keeping them under your thumb without constant rebellion, that's a whole other ball game, and Cyrus played it like a seasoned pro. This is where the economic and administrative innovations come into play, transforming Cyrus's empire from a sprawling patchwork of territories into a well-oiled machine, humming with efficiency. First up on the agenda, let's talk currency. Before Cyrus, The concept of a standardized currency was about as foreign as a smartphone in ancient Persia. Trade was a chaotic dance of bartering, with merchants haggling over everything from silver ingots to grain sacks. Enter Cyrus, with what we might call the great unification of coins. He introduced a standardized currency system, which was no small feat. This was the economic equivalent of convincing everyone at a potluck to agree on a single dish. The Lydians, whom Cyrus had recently conquered, were already minting coins, so Cyrus took a page from their playbook. By using gold and silver coins with a fixed value, he created a medium of exchange that was recognized across his empire. This innovation didn't just streamline trade. It was a masterstroke that bound the empire's diverse economies together like a well-sewn quilt. Now, you might be thinking, coins, big deal. But consider this. A standardized currency meant that traders could conduct business without the constant headache of negotiating exchange rates or evaluating the worth of goods. It was like introducing a universal language for commerce, and it spurred economic growth in a way that made the Persian Empire not just vast, but rich. And let's face it, a rich empire is a stable empire. The benefits trickled down to everyday Persians, who could now engage in trade more efficiently, increasing their own prosperity. But as with all things, there was a catch. Standardized currency also meant taxes became more systematic, so while trade flourished, so did the imperial coffers. Cyrus's talent for spinning gold from the mundane was nothing short of legendary. Next on Cyrus's to-do list was infrastructure. If you're picturing dusty roads and rickety bridges, think again. This was the age of the Royal Road, a marvel of ancient engineering that stretched over 500 kilometers, from Sardis in the west to Susa in the east. That's roughly the distance from New York City to Las Vegas without the neon lights. This road wasn't just a path. It was the empire's jugular vein, pulsating with commerce and communication. Travelers could cross the empire in about 9 days, thanks to relay stations and fresh horses, a speed that was downright mind-boggling for the time. Forget snail mail. This was express delivery, Persian style. But the Royal Road wasn't just a boon for merchants and messengers. It was a strategic asset. Military units could be dispatched swiftly across the vast empire, ensuring that any hint of rebellion could be stamped out with impressive efficiency. And let's not kid ourselves. It wasn't just Cyrus's benevolence that kept the peace. It was also the knowledge that his armies could show up at your doorstep faster than you could say satrapy. This kind of infrastructure was a double-edged sword, providing benefits to the populace while also reinforcing the iron grip of imperial control. Speaking of satrapies, let's delve into the bureaucratic brilliance that was the satrap system. Picture this, an empire so large it would make even the most ambitious project manager break into a cold sweat. Cyrus divided his empire into about 20 satrapies, each overseen by a satrap, essentially a governor with a fancy title. This system allowed for regional autonomy, with satraps responsible for local governance, tax collection, and maintaining order. But don't mistake this for decentralization. Each satrap was under the watchful eye of the king, ensuring loyalty through a network of royal inspectors, sometimes referred to as the king's eyes and ears. Talk about a surveillance state, ancient style. The genius of this system lay in its balance of power. Satraps had enough authority to govern effectively, but not enough to challenge the king. It was like giving your teenager the car keys, but keeping a tracking app on your phone. This system allowed for efficient governance and reduced the potential for rebellion, as local customs and laws were often respected. However, the downside was that the satraps often became mini-kings in their own right, with the wealth and power to potentially challenge the central authority. It was a delicate dance of power, where one wrong step could lead to a coup. For the average Persian, these advancements were a mixed bag. On one hand, the infrastructure projects and economic policies increased trade and prosperity, bringing goods and ideas from across the empire. But on the other hand, it also meant more taxes and a bureaucratic system that could be as oppressive as it was efficient. The Royal Road might bring silk and spices to the marketplace, but it also brought the tax collector to your door. In navigating this complex tapestry of governance, Cyrus demonstrated a knack for administration that would make a modern CEO envious. His innovations laid the groundwork for an empire that would endure long after his death, influencing systems of governance through the ages. Yet, let's not get too swept up in admiration. His empire, like all empires, was built on the backs of the conquered, and while his methods were progressive, they were also pragmatic, ensuring his legacy as both a visionary and a conqueror. So as we leave Cyrus to his empire's intricate dance of economics and administration, remember this: every coin has two sides. For every advancement that brought prosperity and order, there was a price to be paid by those who lived under Persian rule. And while Cyrus the Great might have been a master of empire building, the true cost of his achievements was borne by those who paved the roads and minted the coins. As we continue this journey through history, let's keep an eye on the duality of empire, the grandeur and the grit, the innovation and the imposition, and see how the story of Cyrus unfolds in the chapters yet to come. So, as we continue our journey through the vast tapestry of Cyrus's empire, let's shift our focus from the nuts and bolts of administration to something a little more philosophical. We're diving into Cyrus's relationship with the diverse cultures and religions that peppered his sprawling dominion, and how a certain ancient artifact, the Cyrus cylinder, plays into the narrative of him as a pioneering human rights advocate. Spoiler alert, there's a bit more to it than meets the eye. Let's start with a bit of context. The Persian Empire under Cyrus's rule wasn't just a single, homogeneous block of land with one culture and one religion. It was more like a patchwork quilt, vibrant, varied, and sometimes a little frayed at the edges. With territories stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, Cyrus had an empire that was home to a kaleidoscope of peoples, each with their own gods, languages, and customs. Imagine trying to keep peace at a never-ending family reunion where everyone insists on speaking a different language and debating the merits of their grandma's secret recipe. The real genius of Cyrus lay in his ability to navigate this cultural labyrinth with a deftness that would make a modern-day diplomat green with envy. While some rulers might have taken the my way or the highway approach, Cyrus seemed to understand that respecting local customs was a lot cheaper and less bloody than trying to enforce uniformity. His empire was not a monolith, but a mosaic, with each piece retaining its own identity under the overarching Persian rule. Enter the Cyrus cylinder, often hailed as the first charter of human rights. Discovered in 1879 during an excavation in Babylon, this clay cylinder is etched with an Akkadian cuneiform script that paints Cyrus as a liberator and a benevolent ruler. It's the sort of public relations coup that would make even the most seasoned spin doctor nod in approval. But before we get too carried away, let's remember, context is king. The cylinder dates back to around 539 BCE, when Cyrus conquered Babylon, a city that was as much a cultural and religious hub as it was a political one. The text on the cylinder recounts how Cyrus, with the blessing of the Babylonian god Marduk, entered the city without a fight and promptly set about restoring temples and returning displaced peoples to their homelands. Sounds pretty progressive, right? But let's not forget, Cyrus wasn't writing a UN proclamation. He was securing his rule over a newly acquired territory. By presenting himself as a liberator who respected local gods and traditions, he was effectively saying, "Hey, I'm not here to mess with your way of life, just your taxes." Now, the idea of Cyrus as a pioneer of human rights is certainly a captivating story, but let's peel back the layers. While the cylinder does boast of freeing captive peoples, most famously the Jews, whom he allowed to return to Jerusalem, it's also a piece of propaganda designed to legitimize his rule. It's like the ancient version of a political campaign ad, complete with grand promises and a healthy dose of self-promotion. Cyrus wasn't handing out freedom like flyers at a protest rally. He was consolidating power, and religious tolerance was a means to an end. That said, there's no denying that Cyrus's policies were relatively enlightened for the time. By allowing a degree of religious freedom and endorsing local customs, he minimized unrest and fostered loyalty among his subjects. His approach was less conquer and convert, and more conquer and co-opt. For the diverse peoples of his empire, this meant that while they were now part of a vast Persian dominion, they could largely continue their traditions without interference. It's a bit like being absorbed into a corporate takeover and being told you can keep your ping-pong table in the break room, so long as you hit your quarterly targets. But before we start handing out medals for humanitarianism, let's consider the economic angle. Cyrus's tolerance wasn't just about being a nice guy. It was a savvy economic strategy. By allowing religious and cultural practices to flourish, he kept trade routes open, maintained stability, and ensured the smooth collection of taxes. It was a pragmatic approach that kept the economy humming and the imperial coffers full. After all, a content populace is a lucrative one, and while the Cyrus cylinder might sing his praises, it's worth remembering that the real anthem of his empire was the sweet sound of coins clinking in the treasury. This brings us to a critical observation about empire building and human nature. Benevolence can often be a cloak for ambition, and tolerance a tool for control. Cyrus's policies of religious freedom and cultural respect were as much about maintaining power as they were about kindness. His empire thrived not just because he was a liberator, but because he was a shrewd operator who understood that the strongest chains are the ones people willingly wear. So, where does this leave us in the grand scheme of Cyrus's legacy? He was neither the savior of human rights nor a ruthless tyrant, but a leader who walked the tightrope between power and principle with remarkable skill. His story reminds us that history is rarely black and white, often colored in shades of gray. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between the myth and the man. As we wrap up this chapter, let's keep our eyes on the horizon. Cyrus's empire was a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving and adapting. The policies he implemented weren't just about his reign. They set the stage for future generations. And as we continue to unravel the threads of his story, we'll see how the echoes of his rule reverberated long after his time, influencing the course of history in ways that even Cyrus himself might never have imagined. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the empire's legacy and the man who built it, for the story of Cyrus the Great is far from over. And so, as we sail further into the annals of Cyrus's legacy, we're about to hit the bittersweet note of his life, his death around 530 BC. Now, if you're expecting a poetic demise involving divine intervention or a grand finale under the stars, brace yourself for reality. Cyrus met his end in battle against the Massagetae, a nomadic tribe led by Queen Tamaris. Picture a desert skirmish, not exactly the stuff of epic ballads, but therein lies the truth. The great king fell in the dusty plains of what is now Kazakhstan. It was a stark reminder that even the mightiest rulers are ultimately at the mercy of fate and the sharp edge of a warrior's spear. Cyrus's death marked the end of an era, but not the end of the Persian story. His son, Cambyses Roman II, took the reins, expanding the empire further into Egypt. And while Cambyses had his own flair for conquest, it's the rise of Darius I that truly set the stage for the Achaemenid Empire's golden age. Darius was a distant cousin of Cyrus, and his ascent wasn't exactly a walk in the park. We're talking about a power struggle that involved more cloak-and-dagger maneuvers than a Shakespearean drama. With a little help from the guards, or perhaps just a well-timed coup, Darius seized power in 522 BC, proving that in politics, as in life, timing is everything. Under Darius, the Achaemenid Empire reached its zenith, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a corporate merger, only instead of stock options, you had land, power, and the occasional revolt to manage. Darius was a masterful administrator, refining the satrapy system that Cyrus had pioneered and introducing an early version of income tax. Yes, folks, even in ancient Persia, there was no escaping the taxman. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The efficient bureaucracy and infrastructure that flourished under Darius were built on the foundations laid by Cyrus. His policies of cultural respect and administrative innovation were the bedrock upon which future rulers would build. Cyrus had set the blueprint for an empire that wasn't just about swords and chariots, but about roads, coins, and a network of governance that could withstand the test of time. It was Cyrus's blend of charisma, cunning, and cultural savvy that turned a collection of conquered lands into a cohesive empire. It's easy to get caught up in the romance of Cyrus as a benevolent ruler, but let's not forget the harsh realities. His empire was as much a product of calculated ruthlessness as it was of visionary leadership. The truth is, Cyrus was a man of his time, a pragmatist who knew that power was won not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of his people. His legacy is a testament to the delicate balance between force and diplomacy, between conquering and integrating. He was not just a conqueror, but a creator of systems that would endure long after his death. So, what do we take away from the life and legacy of Cyrus the Great? For one, history is a complex dance of ideals and ambitions, where the line between hero and tyrant is often blurred. Cyrus was a giant of his time, but he was also a man deeply aware of the human condition. He understood that empires are not just built on might, but on the shared aspirations of diverse peoples. His story is a reminder that while the past may be distant, its echoes shape the present and the future. As we close this chapter, let's hold onto the vision of Cyrus, not as a mythical figure, but as a real man with a real impact on the world. His empire set a precedent for governance that would influence everything from the Roman Empire to modern nation-states. And while the stories may be embellished, the legacy is undeniable. Cyrus the Great left an indelible mark on history, a legacy of leadership that continues to inspire and challenge our understanding of what it means to rule. And as we look to the future, maybe we'll find that the lessons of his life, of power tempered with wisdom, of strength balanced with empathy, are more relevant now than ever. So here's to Cyrus the Great, a man who dreamed big, conquered bigger, and left behind a story that will be told for centuries to come. The Medici family didn't just dip their toes into the shallow end of the Renaissance pool. They dove headfirst into the deep end, clutching a chest of gold florins in one hand and a Machiavellian playbook in the other. And splashing around in this pool, we find Catherine de Medici, a girl who transformed from a Florentine pawn into a French queen with an eye for both power and, allegedly, poison. Born in 1519, Catherine was the only legitimate offspring of Lorenzo de Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne. With parents like these, you'd expect her childhood to be a bed of roses. Spoiler, it wasn't. Catherine's early years were more Game of Thrones than Little House on the Prairie. Both her parents kicked the bucket within a month of her birth, leaving her an orphan with a massive inheritance and a target on her back. The Medici were the kind of family that made succession look like light comedy, embroiled in enough power struggles to keep even the most ardent, power-hungry rival busy. Catherine's uncle, Pope Clement Roman VII, took charge of her upbringing. He was the kind of uncle who'd give you a crown instead of a teddy bear, because, priorities. In the bustling Renaissance Florence, Catherine was surrounded by the kind of art that would make the Louvre weep. Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael weren't just names in a history book. They were the guys painting the ceilings. But while the Medici were sponsoring art that'd be ogled for centuries, they were also playing a high-stakes game of political chess. And Catherine was their queen piece before she even hit puberty. Florence in the early 16th century was like a pot of political stew, simmering with alliances, rivalries, and the occasional rebellion. The Medici were booted out of Florence in 1527, thanks to a little kerfuffle known as the Sack of Rome. Catherine found herself in the middle of this mess, stuck in a convent while Florence decided whether it wanted to be a republic or a Medici fiefdom. And here's where things get really fun. Those Florentine rebels threatened to use Catherine as a human shield on their ramparts. Classic family drama, right? Fast forward to 1533, and 13-year-old Catherine was shipped off to France like a Renaissance mail order, bride to marry Henry, Duke of Orleans, the second son of King Francis I. This wasn't exactly a love story for the ages, more like a political transaction with a side of awkward adolescence. But the Medici were nothing if not strategic, and Catherine's dowry was the kind of windfall that made French nobles salivate like Pavlov's dogs. Henry wasn't exactly the Prince Charming type. In fact, he already had a favorite, Diane de Poitiers, who was 20 years his senior. Catherine, the new girl in a foreign land, was left to find her footing in the treacherous French court. If you think mean girls today are bad, try dealing with 16th century nobles who'd stab you in the back without ruining their doublets. Catherine, however, had the resilience of a cockroach in an apocalypse. She kept her head down and learned the ropes, knowing full well that power in this world was more about patience than passion. Despite the less-than-romantic start, Catherine and Henry eventually produced a brood of 10 children. If nothing else, Catherine was playing the long game, and her offspring became her chess pieces in the power struggle that was European politics. By the time she was 40, Catherine had gone from an orphaned pawn in Florence to the queen consort of France, and when Henry accidentally died in a jousting accident in 1559, because of course, jousting was the medieval equivalent of texting while driving, Catherine stepped into the role she was born to play, the power behind the throne. Catherine de Medici's early life is a prime example of how history is less about fairy tales and more about strategic alliances, opportunistic marriages, and surviving long enough to play your trump card. So when you hear tales of her as a poisoner and a schemer, remember that she learned her craft in the brutal school of Renaissance politics, where survival wasn't just a goal, it was an art form. Let's dive right into the French court, where Catherine de Medici, fresh from the rolling hills of Tuscany, found herself knee-deep in a world where daggers were as sharp as tongues and allegiances shifted faster than the fashion trends. In 1533, Catherine, a mere 14-year-old, arrived in France to marry Henry, Duke of Orleans, in what was less a romantic union and more a strategic merger. This wasn't your typical fairy tale. If anything, it was a chess game, and Catherine was the pawn hoping to become the queen. Now, you've got to understand, the French court was a circus of opulence and intrigue. Picture this. Lavish banquets with enough food to feed a small army, all while nobles gossiped louder than a flock of seagulls over a chip. But for Catherine, it was no holiday. She was the new girl in a land that wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for her. Her husband, Henry, had eyes only for Diane de Poitiers, a woman who could have been Catherine's mother and probably taught Henry more than a few tricks in the art of love and power. Diane was no ordinary mistress. She was a political powerhouse, wrapped in silk and sophistication. Catherine, meanwhile, was left to navigate a court that might as well have been a minefield. It was a place where alliances were as fragile as the crystal goblets they drank from, and where a misplaced word could be as dangerous as a misplaced sword. Catherine had to learn fast, and she did so with a tenacity that would make a pit bull look like a lapdog. This was a time when the French court was awash with the kind of wealth that could make modern billionaires blush. The king's coffers were fat, thanks to New World gold and taxes squeezed from the peasantry. But with wealth came decadence, and with decadence came a fair share of absurdity. Imagine a place where people wore perfumes not just to smell nice, but to mask the fact that they bathed less frequently than a housecat. However, it wasn't all foie gras and fine wine. The court was a political battleground, and Catherine was smack dab in the middle of it. Her role was to produce heirs, lots of them, and she did her duty with impressive efficiency. By 1547, when Henry ascended the throne as Henry Roman II, Catherine had already given birth to 3 children, neatly securing her position. Yet, despite being queen consort, she was still overshadowed by Diane. Talk about a love triangle where one side was a bit too sharp for comfort. Catherine's journey from sidelined wife to a formidable force in her own right is a masterclass in patience and strategy. She observed, she learned, she waited. And oh, how she waited. Her time would come, but first she had to navigate a court where whispers could get you killed faster than a duel at dawn. Poison was the weapon of choice for those who preferred discretion over drama. It was rumored that Catherine dabbled in it, though, like most juicy gossip, the truth is murkier than the set. In a world where everyone had an ulterior motive, Catherine's biggest challenge was staying afloat in a sea of sharks. The court was a place where loyalty was as fickle as the latest fad. One day you were in the king's favor, the next you were out, and sometimes out meant 6 feet under. Catherine, however, had the resilience of a cockroach in nuclear fallout. She played the long game, knowing that in the theater of court life, patience was the ultimate virtue. When Henry died in 1559, a casualty of a jousting accident that was the Renaissance equivalent of a tragic Instagram fail, Catherine's moment arrived. As the king's widow, she became the queen mother to her sons, who would take the throne one after another, like a game of musical chairs with crowns. Her influence grew, and she wielded it with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet. Catherine had learned well from her days as a sidelined wife, mastering the art of political maneuvering with a finesse that left her rivals reeling. The court, once a place of alienation and isolation for Catherine, became her playground, her battleground, her kingdom. She was no longer the outsider but the puppet master, pulling strings with a deftness that left even her detractors in awe. Catherine de Medici had arrived, and she was here to stay. But as we know, power comes with a price, and Catherine would soon find herself paying it in ways she could never have imagined. Stay tuned, because the saga of Catherine de' Medici is far from over. We've covered the treacherous terrain of her early years at the French court, but the real fireworks are just beginning. There are more plots to unravel, more myths to bust, and more absurdities to chuckle over. So grab your goblet, settle in, and let's see what this formidable queen has up her elegantly embroidered sleeve next. And so, Catherine de' Medici sat at the epicenter of a royal court that danced on the edge of chaos, an opulent stage where political drama was the main performance. With the king's death, she found herself in a position of unprecedented influence, the queen mother to a brood of kings-in-waiting. Her power was undeniable, but with great power came great suspicion. Cue the myth of the Black Queen, a legend as sticky as the French court's penchant for scandal. Now, let's talk poison, because no tale of 16th century intrigue is complete without a little toxic drama, right? Catherine's reputation for dabbling in the dark arts and poisonings is more storied than substantiated. Sure, the legend is juicy, a regal femme fatale with a penchant for arsenic-laced dinner parties. But hold your horses, because the reality is less Hollywood thriller and more political chessboard. In truth, Catherine's alleged use of poison was likely more about maneuvering through the poisonous politics of the time than brewing actual potions. The French wars of religion were the perfect backdrop for such myths to flourish. Picture France in the mid-16th century, a nation divided between Catholics and Huguenots, that's your fancy French Protestants. With tensions harder than a Parisian summer, Catherine had to balance these factions like a tightrope walker juggling flaming torches. Her sons, Francis Roman II, Charles Roman IX, and Henry Roman III, wore the crown like a game of hot potato, each one trying not to drop it amidst the religious turmoil. Catherine's political acumen was her real weapon. She wasn't poisoning her enemies. She was trying to keep them from poisoning each other. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572 is a case in point. What started as a royal wedding, intended to unite Catholics and Protestants, ended with blood in the Seine. It's a grim episode that some historians paint as orchestrated by Catherine, but here's the kicker. It was more a case of a carefully laid plan spiraling out of control than a premeditated slaughter penned in poison ink. The massacre didn't just give Catherine a bad rap. It cemented her as a Machiavellian mastermind in the eyes of her enemies. But let's be real. Her actions, while controversial, were born out of a desperate bid to retain stability in a France ready to tear itself apart. She was the mother of kings, after all, not a Bond villain with a license to kill. What Catherine truly excelled at was diplomacy, although her methods were as unconventional as her rumored poison palette. Her famous flying squads, ladies-in-waiting who doubled as spies, were her eyes and ears, gathering intel faster than you can say espionage. And while some whispered of her involvement in the occult, the truth was more mundane. Catherine was a shrewd operator in a world where information was power, and misinformation was the weapon of choice. Let's talk economics, because nothing says power play like controlling a nation's purse strings. France at the time wasn't exactly swimming in gold. Wars drained the royal coffers faster than a leaky bucket, and Catherine knew that economic stability was as crucial as political peace. She oversaw the management of the kingdom's finances, ensuring that her sons' reigns weren't just exercises in futility. She leveraged marriages like a Wall Street broker plays the stock market, securing alliances to bolster France's position in the volatile European landscape. The legends of Catherine's dark arts, while alluring, pale in comparison to her real feats. She navigated a male-dominated world with a finesse that left her contemporaries both in awe and in fear. She was a master of survival, a woman who played the hand she was dealt with a skill that would make even the most seasoned poker player sweat. In the grand tapestry of history, Catherine de' Medici wasn't the Black Queen of sinister repute, but rather a figure who understood that in a world where the rules were written by men, a woman had to rewrite them to survive. Her life was a testament to the art of adaptation, a reminder that sometimes the greatest power lies not in the sword or the vial, but in the mind. And so, as we leave Catherine to her courtly machinations and strategizing, remember, the truth is often more complex than the myth. Catherine's legacy, is one of resilience and intellect, a story that continues to unfold. So stay with me as we explore more of her life in the next part of our saga. There are more myths to debunk, more political plots to dissect, and more historical truths to uncover. Grab your cloak, because the court is a cold place, and we've only just begun to crack the ice. As we plunge back into the swirling vortex of Catherine de Medici's life, let's pick up right where we left off, with our formidable Queen Mother navigating her way through the murky waters of French politics. Her regency, which kicked off after the untimely demise of her husband, Henry Roman II, was no cushy gig. It was more like a high-stakes poker game where the chips were kingdoms, and the players were armed with daggers concealed beneath their tunics. Catherine, now the power behind the throne, was tasked with ensuring that her sons didn't just keep their crowns, but their heads as well. Her eldest son, Francis Roman II, was barely 15 when he ascended the throne in 1559. If you think teenage angst is bad, try throwing in a crown and a fractious nobility. Francis' reign was shorter than a tick-tock video. He died after 17 months, leaving Catherine to once again step up to the plate as regent for Charles Roman IX, who was all of 10 years old at the time. The political climate Catherine faced was as pleasant as a Parisian street in the middle of a heatwave. The French wars of religion were simmering like a pot about to boil over, and Catherine had to play referee between the Catholics and the Huguenots. She wasn't just playing for the win, she was playing for survival. Her job was to keep her sons on the throne and France from imploding. No biggie, right? With the Valois family teetering like a Jenga tower, Catherine's regency saw her pulling every string available. The economy was as stable as a house of cards, with the costs of war draining royal coffers faster than a nobleman could gulp down a goblet of wine. France was bleeding money, and Catherine knew she needed a strategy as shrewd as a fox at a hen party to keep the kingdom afloat. Enter the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, 1572, an event that makes Game of Thrones' Red Wedding look like a mild disagreement over dessert. The massacre was supposed to be a royal wedding to unite the feuding Catholic and Protestant factions. Instead, it turned into a slaughter that left thousands dead in Paris and across France. The blame game was swift, and Catherine found herself in the crosshairs, accused of orchestrating the bloodbath. But was she the evil genius behind it, or just a desperate mother trying to hold her family and country together? The reality is murkier than the Seine at midnight. Catherine's intentions might have been to quell tensions, but once the violence began, it spread faster than a rumor in a royal court. The massacre wasn't so much a premeditated plan as it was a catastrophic spiral out of control. Her role was likely more about trying to put out the fire than lighting the match. Still, the massacre tainted her legacy, branding her as a Machiavellian villainess in the annals of history. Economically, France was like a ship taking on water, and Catherine was frantically bailing it out. She understood that a stable France wasn't just about appeasing warring factions. It was about cash flow. She implemented policies to boost trade and tried to curb the extravagance of the court. The French treasury was like a sieve, and Catherine knew that fiscal prudence was key to maintaining the Valois grip on power. Catherine also played the marriage game like a seasoned chess master. She arranged strategic unions for her children to secure alliances, much like a modern-day CEO negotiating mergers. Her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, married Henry of Navarre, a Protestant, in what was supposed to be a gesture of unity. Spoiler alert, it didn't quite work out as planned, but it was a testament to Catherine's relentless pursuit of peace through diplomacy. Now, let's bust some myths. Catherine was often painted as the Black Queen, a moniker that conjured images of witches and witchcraft. But the truth is less about dark magic and more about the dark art of politics. She wasn't brewing potions. She was brewing alliances and strategies in a world where survival was a daily battle. Her so-called use of poison was more about navigating the poisonous politics of her time than concocting deadly elixirs. Catherine's legacy is a complex tapestry of ambition, survival, and maternal instinct. She wasn't just a mother to her children. She was a mother to France, albeit a mother whose tough love could be mistaken for tyranny. Her life was a tightrope walk, balancing the demands of her family with the demands of a kingdom on the brink. In the grand scheme of things, Catherine de Medici was more than the sum of her myths. She was a woman who wielded power in an era when women were expected to wield nothing more than a needle and thread. Her regency was marked by cunning diplomacy, economic strategy, and the relentless pursuit of stability in a world that seemed hell-bent on chaos. As we leave Catherine plotting her next move in the chess game of French politics, remember, her story isn't just one of power and intrigue. It's a story of survival against the odds. Stay tuned for more as we delve deeper into the life of this remarkable woman, a queen who refused to be a pawn in anyone else's game. There are more layers to peel back, more truths to uncover, and more myths to debunk. So grab your cloak, because the court is still a cold place, and there's plenty more to come. And so, as we delve further into Catherine de Medici's storied existence, let's flip the script from political machinations to her role as a cultural architect of France. Because, let's face it, when you're not busy staving off civil war or debunking your own myth as a poison-wielding queen, you might as well dabble in a bit of art and architecture to leave a legacy that's more Louvre than lurid. Catherine's love affair with the arts was as fervent as a Renaissance sculptor chiseling away at a block of marble. She wasn't just a patron. She was the grand architect of cultural renaissance at the French court. In a world where opulence often masked decay, she understood that art and architecture were as much about power as they were about beauty. Her creations weren't just decorative, they were declarations. Take the Tuileries Palace, for instance, a magnificent testament to her vision. Commissioned in 1564, it wasn't just a royal residence, it was a statement in stone and mortar. While the palace itself has since been lost to the flames of history, its gardens remain a testament to her legacy, a place where the Parisian elite could promenade and ponder the intricacies of courtly intrigue. It was Catherine's way of saying, "I'm not just here to rule, I'm here to redefine." Catherine didn't stop at bricks and mortar. She was a patron of the arts in the most Renaissance sense of the word, championing painters, architects, and sculptors who would leave their mark on French culture. When she wasn't busy keeping her sons on the throne, she was busy ensuring that France was draped in the finest of cultural tapestries. She brought Italian artists to France, effectively creating a cultural exchange program centuries before Erasmus made it cool. Her court was a swirling vortex of artistic innovation, a place where the likes of Jean Gauguin and Germain Pilon could thrive under her patronage. Now, if you're thinking that all this art and architecture was just a vanity project, think again. Catherine was well aware that culture was currency in the royal marketplace, and she spent it like a Wall Street titan with a penchant for old masters. In a kingdom teetering on the brink of chaos, art was her weapon of choice, a means to project stability and sophistication amidst the clamor of conflict. Economically, Catherine's investments in the arts were a masterstroke. At a time when France's coffers were as empty as a peasant's pantry after a bad harvest, her cultural projects were a strategic play. They boosted the economy, provided employment, and fostered a sense of national pride that was as intoxicating as the finest Bordeaux. It was a savvy move in a game where perception was as crucial as reality. But let's not sugarcoat it. Catherine's influence was a double-edged sword. Her patronage of the arts and her architectural endeavors were sometimes criticized as excessive, especially when juxtaposed against the harsh realities of the French wars of religion. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of cultural triumphs and socio-political challenges, a testament to the fact that history is rarely black and white, more like a chiaroscuro painting, where light and shadow dance in eternal conflict. As a woman navigating the male-dominated corridors of power, Catherine wielded her intellect like a rapier, cutting through the noise with precision and poise. She understood that in a world ruled by men, her influence had to be as subtle as it was strategic. Her actions were often misunderstood, her intentions misconstrued, and her legacy as much myth as reality. But perhaps that's the true mark of a historical figure, when stories and speculation intertwine to create a legend that endures through the ages. Catherine's mythos as the Black Queen persists, partly because it's a narrative that fits neatly into the annals of dramatic history. But behind the shadowy tales lies the truth of a woman who was not only a survivor but a visionary. Her influence on French culture was profound, and her contributions to the arts were as enduring as they were transformative. She wasn't just a queen. She was a creator, an innovator, and above all, a master of reinvention. As we wrap up our journey through the life of Catherine de Medici, it's clear that her story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She played the cards she was dealt with a finesse that left an indelible mark on history. Her life was a series of chess moves, each one calculated to ensure not just survival, but supremacy in a world that often seemed set against her. In the grand tapestry of history, Catherine's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction, a reminder that the truth is often more nuanced than the myths we create. She was a patron of the arts, a political powerhouse, and a woman who refused to be defined by the limitations of her time. Her life was a testament to the power of perseverance, and her story continues to captivate and challenge us to this day. So as you drift off into the realm of dreams, remember Catherine de Medici not as the villain of a historical drama, but as a queen who dared to redefine her world. Her legacy is a reminder that history is more than just facts and figures. It's a story of resilience, of vision, and of the enduring human quest to leave a mark on the world. Sleep well, dear listener, with the knowledge that history is not just a tale of the past, but a canvas upon which the present is painted. Florence Nightingale didn't just stroll into history. She stamped in with the determination of someone who'd rather dissect the human condition than the latest Regency fashion trends. Born in 1820 in, fittingly, Florence, Italy, she was a classic overachiever from the get-go. Imagine a young woman in the Victorian era who would rather diagnose a fever than attend a ball. That's Florence for you. Her parents, William and Frances Nightingale, were wealthy enough to own not one but two estates in England. Little Florence wasn't exactly picking daisies in the English countryside. She was more likely to be found with her nose buried in books about sanitation or statistics. Florence's life was a delightful contradiction. On one hand, she was raised in a household where her sister, Parthenope, was expected to do all the things a lady of leisure should, like embroidery or fainting artfully at the sight of a handsome suitor. On the other hand, Florence had a knack for asking uncomfortable questions like, "Why can't women be doctors?" Or, "What's the deal with this whole germs thing?" Her family wasn't too thrilled, to say the least. In those days, women were supposed to get married, have children, and maybe learn a little piano in their spare time. But Florence had other ideas. Now, let's talk about that time she turned down a marriage proposal because she'd rather deal with bedpans than bridal veils. Richard Monckton Milnes, a poet and politician, was quite taken with Florence. He proposed, and most women of the time would have jumped at the chance to be Mrs. Milnes, but not our Florence. She famously declined, stating she had a calling from God to help the sick and suffering. Picture her family's reaction, somewhere between scandalized horror and disbelief. It was the Victorian equivalent of announcing you were leaving a cushy corporate job to start a commune in the forest. Florence's refusal to settle for a life of genteel domesticity wasn't just a quirk, it was revolutionary. In 1845, she started to seriously consider nursing as a profession, a choice that was about as socially acceptable as deciding to be a pirate. Nursing was not the noble profession we think of today. It was considered dirty, low-class work. Nurses were often seen as little better than drunks and streetwalkers. Yet Florence was determined, and in 1851 she convinced her parents to let her train in Germany at the Lutheran Hospital of Pastor Fliedner in Kaiserswerth. This was akin to announcing she was running off to join the circus. While in Germany, she learned the nitty-gritty of nursing, which was more about scrubbing floors and washing linens than the glamorous life of saving lives. Yet Florence was undeterred. She returned to England, armed with knowledge and a keen sense of purpose. By 1853, she became the superintendent of the institution for the care of sick gentlewomen in London. The salary, a whopping £500 a year, which was no small change at the time, enough to make you consider a career change, even in today's money. Florence's early life was not just a prelude to her later achievements, it was a testament to her refusal to conform. She understood that the world needed changing and was stubborn enough to believe she could do it. Her story is not just about a woman who nursed soldiers during the Crimean War, it's about someone who saw the world's absurdities and decided to tackle them head-on. And it all started with a woman who didn't just want to live in society, but wanted to change it. Florence Nightingale's journey to the Crimean War was less of a direct march and more of a chaotic scramble to answer a desperate call. You see, by 1854, the British government found itself in a bit of a pickle. They'd sent troops to the Crimea to engage in a contest of empire building with Russia, but it turned out they were woefully unprepared for the logistical nightmare that is war. The soldiers were dropping like flies, not from Russian bullets, but from diseases like cholera and typhus. Enter Florence, who was about to turn this tragic comedy into a legendary drama. Upon her arrival in Scutari, Turkey, which was the main British base hospital, Florence was greeted not by eager patients, but by a scene that was horror film worthy. Picture this: overworked, underqualified staff trying to tend to hundreds of wounded soldiers in a facility that was less a hospital and more a squalid dungeon. The place was so filthy that one report stated the corridors were covered with blood, feces, and infected clothing. Yikes! These conditions were hardly conducive to recovery, and Florence knew it. The mortality rate was a staggering 42%. To put that in perspective, that's almost half of the patients not making it out alive. Not exactly the kind of odds you'd want to bet on. But Florence wasn't just any nurse. She was a force of nature, armed with a lamp and a relentless drive for reform. She didn't simply roll up her sleeves, she practically tore them off. Florence quickly set about scrubbing the place cleaner than a whistle, insisting on fresh linens and proper ventilation. She was a data enthusiast long before spreadsheets were a thing, and her meticulous record-keeping became her secret weapon. With a notebook in hand, she documented deaths, diseases, and the conditions of each ward. This wasn't just for posterity. It was ammunition for her war against ignorance and inefficiency. Florence's efforts were nothing short of revolutionary, and the results were jaw-dropping. Within 6 months, she had reduced the mortality rate from that grim 42% down to a much more survivable 2%. That's right, she cut it by a whopping 40 percentage points, turning what was essentially a death trap into a functioning hospital. How did she accomplish this miracle? By applying some basic principles of hygiene and sanitation, concepts that, astonishingly, were still revolutionary at the time. She practically invented the hospital audit, challenging the status quo with every statistic she gathered. Now, while Florence was scrubbing away the grime, back in Britain, the bureaucrats weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet. If anything, they were tripping over their own red tape. The British establishment was filled with what one might call bureaucratic buffoons, officials more concerned with protocol than practicality. They were often more of a hindrance than a help, but Florence wasn't one to be deterred by a little bit of paperwork. She had a talent for pushing through the nonsense, making her a hero not just to the soldiers she nursed, but to anyone who had ever had to deal with officialdom. Florence's nightly rounds soon became the stuff of legend, earning her the nickname, the Lady with the Lamp. This romantic image of her gliding through the darkened halls, lamp in hand, checking on patients, is certainly inspiring. However, it's important to remember that this was no mere stroll. Each visit was a chance to collect more data, to understand better the maladies afflicting her charges, and to find new ways to combat the spread of disease. She was on a mission, not just of mercy, but of method. But let's not gloss over the grit behind the glow. The Romantics like to imagine Florence as an angel of mercy, but she was also something of a strategic genius. Her data collection was arguably the most critical part of her mission. It allowed her to develop a case so compelling that even the most obstinate officials couldn't ignore it. She used the numbers to advocate for better military medical practices, making her an early pioneer in evidence-based medicine. In a world where intuition often trumped insight, Florence was a breath of fresh, disinfected air. In the middle of this whirlwind of reform and controversy, one has to wonder, how did she manage to maintain such a relentless pace? Well, Florence was as much a product of her era as an exception to it. Her dedication to her cause was fueled by a sense of duty that bordered on the spiritual. She wasn't just cleaning up a hospital. She was purifying what she saw as a moral failing of society, the neglect of its most vulnerable. Her lamp wasn't just illuminating the sick. It was casting a light on the dark corners of Victorian complacency. As the war dragged on, Florence became a symbol of hope and resilience, both in the Crimea and back in Britain. Work brought her fame, and with it, a platform to push for widespread reform. But the fame wasn't all roses and applause. It came with its own set of challenges. While the public adored her, the establishment was less than thrilled with her insistence on shaking up the status quo. Her efforts were sometimes met with resistance, skepticism, and even outright hostility. Yet Florence persisted, because when you're busy saving lives, You don't have time for petty politics. And so, the legend of Florence Nightingale began to take shape, not just as a nurse, but as a reformer, a statistician, and a pioneer in the field of public health. Her story during the Crimean War is a testament to what one determined individual can achieve against all odds, a tale of grit, grime, and groundbreaking change. As we look at the lamplit corridors of history, Florence stands not just as a figure of compassion, but as a beacon of progress, illuminating the path for all who dare to challenge the darkness. But hold on, we're not closing the book on Florence just yet. Her story doesn't end with the war. It's merely the beginning of an even more ambitious chapter, where she would take her newfound knowledge and prestige and turn it into lasting change back home. Stay tuned, because Florence Nightingale's legacy is about to get even more fascinating. As Florence Nightingale returned from the Crimean War, she found herself armed not with a sword, but with something far more powerful: data. And let's face it, in a world where ignorance was blissfully abundant, her statistics were like a breath of fresh air, or perhaps more fittingly, a whiff of antiseptic. Her battlefield was now the sprawling, bureaucratic labyrinth of the British healthcare system. She was about to embark on a campaign against red tape and indifference, determined to revolutionize the way Britain cared for its sick and wounded. First up on Florence's post-war agenda was the establishment of the Nightingale Training School at St. Thomas Hospital in London in 1860. This wasn't just another institution. It was the very first secular nursing school in the world. Florence was on a mission to transform nursing from a job that was seen as a last resort for the destitute into a respectable profession. It was her way of saying, "Hey, society, it's time to take nursing seriously." Imagine the shockwaves this sent through the Victorian social order, a bit like announcing you were going to teach cats to do calculus. To fund her ambitious project, she didn't wait around for the British government to cut through its own red tape. Instead, she leveraged her newfound fame, raising the equivalent of over £4 million in today's money through the Nightingale Fund. This was no small feat, especially in an age when women were more likely to be found organizing tea parties than spearheading major philanthropic campaigns. But Florence, with her characteristic flair, managed to rally both the public and private sectors to her cause. Now, let's talk about her curriculum, which was a game-changer. It wasn't just about teaching women how to bandage wounds or administer medication. Florence insisted on a scientific approach to nursing, including rigorous training in hygiene, patient observation, and record-keeping. This was revolutionary. Before her, nursing education was about as structured as a toddler's art class. But Florence was the original multitasker, crafting a syllabus that was as comprehensive as it was demanding. And let's be honest, if anyone could whip a bunch of rookies into shape, it was the woman who had tamed the chaos of Scutari. Her efforts didn't stop at education. Florence was also a prolific writer, penning over 200 books, reports, and pamphlets. Her most famous work, Notes on Nursing, was published in 1859 and became an instant bestseller. It wasn't just a manual for nurses, it was a manifesto. In it, she laid out her vision for patient care, cleanliness, fresh air, good nutrition, concepts that seem like no-brainers today but were revolutionary at the time. The book was written in plain language, designed to be understood by anyone from a seasoned nurse to a concerned mother. Florence was democratizing healthcare knowledge, one page at a time. But let's not put Florence on too high a pedestal without acknowledging the grit beneath the veneer. She was a woman who worked herself to the bone, often battling illness and fatigue. Despite her declining health, she continued to push for reforms, driven by a sense of duty that bordered on the obsessive. Her work was her life, and she famously remarked, "I attribute my success to this. I never gave or took any excuse." Imagine a world where everyone followed that mantra. We'd probably solve world hunger and colonize Mars by next Tuesday. Her battle against institutional inertia was not without its challenges. The British government, ever the bastion of bureaucratic slowness, wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for her reforms. Many officials were skeptical of her ideas, viewing them as unnecessary disruptions to the status quo. But Florence was nothing if not tenacious. She lobbied tirelessly, using her statistical analyses to illustrate the dire state of public health. Her evidence was irrefutable, and slowly but surely the walls of resistance began to crumble. Florence's influence extended beyond Britain's borders. Her methodologies and philosophies were adopted internationally, setting the standard for modern nursing and public health. She was a global phenomenon, a 19th century influencer before Instagram made it trendy. Countries like the United States and Australia began to model their nursing programs on her teachings, recognizing the value of her methodical, evidence-based approach. Yet, amid all her successes, Florence remained a deeply private person. She shunned the spotlight, preferring to let her work speak for itself. This enigmatic quality only added to her allure, turning her into a living legend. People were fascinated by the woman who could sway governments and transform societal norms, all while maintaining an air of humble dedication. She was a paradox, a public figure who preferred the shadows, a revolutionary who valued tradition. Her relentless pursuit of progress was not without personal cost. Florence spent much of her later life as an invalid, her health deteriorating due to the relentless pace she had set for herself. She often worked from her bed, directing her efforts through letters and reports. Yet, even in her diminished state, she continued to be a formidable force in public health. Her ability to effect change from the confines of her room was nothing short of remarkable, a testament to the power of intellect and determination over physical limitations. In the grand tapestry of history, Florence Nightingale stands out as a thread of brilliance and resilience. She was a trailblazer, a visionary who refused to be bound by the conventions of her time. Her legacy is not just in the institutions she founded or the books she wrote, but in the very fabric of modern healthcare. She taught the world that caring for the sick was not just a duty, but a science, a sentiment that continues to resonate today. And so, as we delve deeper into the story of Florence Nightingale, it's clear that her post-war efforts were just as groundbreaking as her wartime heroics. She was a woman of contradictions and complexities, a pioneer who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. Her contributions to nursing and public health were revolutionary, setting the stage for future generations to follow. But hold on to your hats, because her story is far from over. The indomitable spirit of Florence Nightingale still has more to teach us, and the best is yet to come. Florence Nightingale's story is a testament to the power of one person's relentless drive, and as we peek into her later years, you might think she'd be content to rest on her laurels, sipping tea and reminiscing about her glory days. But oh no, Florence wasn't wired that way. Despite being mostly bedridden after the Crimean War, she continued to pull strings and influence public health policy with the precision of a maestro conducting an orchestra from behind a curtain. Let's debunk the whole lady with the lamp myth while we're here. Sure, the image of Florence gliding through dimly lit hospital corridors with her trusty lamp is iconic, but it's a bit like saying Steve Jobs was famous for wearing turtlenecks. Both are true, but neither captures the full scope of their contributions. The lamp was just a tool. Her real magic was in her data-driven mind and her ability to persuade crusty old men in power to listen to a woman with revolutionary ideas. She was, in modern terms, the ultimate influencer, and she didn't need Instagram to do it. Even in her later years, Florence wasn't one to let a little thing like chronic illness slow her down. While confined to her bed, she churned out letters and reports faster than most healthy bureaucrats. Her correspondence was legendary, with some estimates suggesting she wrote over 14,000 letters. That's more than many people send emails in a lifetime, and she did it all with a quill. She was like the original work-from-home warrior, redefining what remote productivity looked like long before Zoom meetings became a thing. Her influence didn't just stop at writing letters either. Florence had the ear of people in high places, from prime ministers to Queen Victoria herself. She used her connections to push for reforms in army medical services and civilian hospitals. Imagine being so influential that even from your sick, you're steering national policy. Her work led to the establishment of the Royal Commission on the Health of the Army in 1857. It was her statistical analyses, those pesky numbers again, that convinced the Commission to implement sweeping changes. Talk about a mic drop moment. Now, let's talk about the Victorian PR machine that helped shape her legacy. The romantic image of Florence was partly the work of the press, who loved a good story as much then as they do now. Newspapers painted her as a saintly figure, the angel of the battlefield, because who doesn't love a feel-good narrative? But this halo effect glossed over the complexities of her character and the gritty realities of her work. The truth is, Florence was a tough-as-nails reformer with a sharp tongue and a no-nonsense attitude, qualities that were essential in a world that preferred its women to be seen and not heard. Her sharp wit was legendary. Once, when a high-ranking official commented on the chaotic state of military hospitals, she reportedly quipped, "You cannot make an omelette without breaking eggs, and you cannot improve a hospital without breaking heads." This was Florence in a nutshell, unafraid to ruffle feathers if it meant getting things done. Her humor, though dry, was a weapon she wielded skillfully, cutting through the nonsense with the precision of a scalpel. In a society that valued female decorum over disruptive dialogue, Florence was a master of using her perceived role to her advantage. She knew that as a woman, she had to tread lightly in certain circles, but she also understood the power of being underestimated. By playing into the angel persona when it suited her, she was able to gain access to influential figures and bend their ears to her cause. It was a classic case of using the system to beat the system. Her work didn't stop at policy and education. She was also a pioneer in advocating for mental health awareness. In a time when the mentally ill were often hidden away in asylums, Florence argued for humane treatment and proper care. She recognized that mental health was just as important as physical health, a radical concept in an era when patients were often dismissed as incurable. In her typical fashion, she backed up her advocacy with data, showing that compassionate care led to better outcomes. Like any good historical figure, Florence's life was a tapestry of contradictions. She was deeply spiritual yet grounded in the scientific method. She was a public figure who craved privacy. She was a woman who, despite never marrying, had a profound impact on the lives of countless others. Her legacy is a complex one, shaped by both her achievements and the narratives woven around her. Victorian society might have preferred its women silent and decorative, but Florence Nightingale was anything. But as we continue to unravel her story, it's clear that Florence wasn't just a nurse or a reformer. She was a force of nature, a human whirlwind who reshaped the landscape of public health. Her later years were not a period of decline, but rather a continuation of her life's work, proving that sometimes the most powerful revolutions are led not by those in the spotlight, but by those working tirelessly behind the scenes. Stay tuned, because Florence's story still has more layers to uncover, and the best is yet to come. Florence Nightingale's story doesn't just end with her later years. It echoes through the halls of every hospital, every nursing school, and every public health policy meeting today. So, what's the deal with her lasting impact? Was she a saintly figure, the angel of mercy who floated through hospital wards like a benevolent spectre? Or was she a relentless reformer, a woman hell-bent on bulldozing through the status quo with all the subtlety of a battering ram? Spoiler alert. She was both. And that's exactly why her legacy still resonates. Let's start with nursing. Before Florence, nursing was less of a profession and more of a last-ditch option for women who had few other choices. Think of it as the Victorian equivalent of failing to launch. Florence flipped the script. By establishing the Nightingale Training School in 1860, she catapulted nursing into the realm of respectability and expertise. Imagine the shock. Women in starched uniforms, not just mopping floors, but actually making medical decisions. Florence didn't just train nurses. She transformed them into an army of skilled professionals. And boy, did she love her stats. By 1882, the school had trained over 1,000 nurses, a number that might seem quaint today, but was groundbreaking in its time. Her impact wasn't limited to the UK. Florence's methodologies spread like a Victorian viral meme, influencing nursing practices across the globe. In the United States, the Civil War's Nurse Corps took a leaf out of her book, literally, as many read notes on nursing. And in Australia, well, they didn't just import British tea, they adopted her entire training model. In economic terms, Florence's approach didn't just save lives. It saved money. By reducing infection rates and improving patient outcomes, hospitals saw fewer repeat visits and shorter recovery times. Talk about a win-win. But let's tackle the mythology. The lady with the lamp image, perpetuated by newspapers eager for a hero, casts Florence in a soft, almost ethereal light. It's a great story, an angel of mercy, her lamp cutting through the darkness. but it also glosses over the grit. The real Florence was a data-driven powerhouse who wielded statistics like a surgeon wields a scalpel. She was strategic, political, and sometimes downright ruthless when it came to achieving her goals. In a world dominated by men in stuffy suits, she was a woman who could outmaneuver them with nothing more than a quill and a well-placed stat. And why does it matter whether she was saint or reformer? Because it highlights a fundamental truth. Real change often requires both compassion and confrontation. Florence's story resonates because it shows that kindness isn't always gentle and reform isn't always pretty. Her legacy teaches us that sometimes you have to shake the tree to get the apples to fall. It's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was in the 19th century, especially when it comes to pushing through bureaucratic inertia. If Florence could see the red tape in today's healthcare systems, she'd likely roll her eyes, crack her knuckles, and dive right in. Speaking of today, what would Florence Nightingale be doing if she were around now? Well, she'd probably be the keynote speaker at a TED talk, captivating audiences with a unique blend of data and drama. Picture her on stage, lamp in one hand, PowerPoint clicker in the other, as she lays out her vision for 21st century healthcare. Her lessons would be timeless. Embrace the data, challenge the norms, and never, ever settle for mediocrity. Because in the end, Florence's story is about more than just nursing. It's about the relentless pursuit of a better world. And let's not forget the economic angle. Florence wasn't just a healthcare reformer. She was an early advocate for cost-effective medicine. By reducing infection rates and improving hospital efficiency, she demonstrated that good care didn't have to come with a hefty price tag. In today's terms, she might be the CEO of a non-profit dedicated to healthcare reform, leveraging data to drive down costs while improving outcomes. She'd be the kind of leader who'd make headlines for her innovative approaches and her uncanny ability to cut through the nonsense. As we wrap up this journey through Florence's life, it's clear that her impact is as much about the future as it is about the past. Her legacy isn't just in the buildings that bear her name or the nursing schools that follow her model. It's in the mindset she championed, one that values evidence over opinion, action over inertia, and compassion over complacency. Florence Nightingale wasn't just a nurse. She was a force of nature, a human catalyst for change. And that, dear listeners, is why her story still echoes today. So here's to Florence, the woman who turned nursing into a noble calling, who wielded statistics like a sword, and who never took no for an answer. She might not have been perfect, who is? But she was perfectly relentless, and that's exactly what the world needed. As you drift off with these tales of Florence swirling in your mind, remember, change is possible, even when it seems improbable. And if Florence taught us anything, it's that a little bit of Nightingale spirit can go a long way.